Welcome everyone to back to Cinematic Realms after we took last week off, and boy, do I wish scheduling had worked out differently. Not going to get into why. If you know, you know. But yeah, I hope everybody's having a good day. Today is a special stream because as we kind of advertised, this is our first Game of Thrones stream on the channel, which Jared seems mad.
It is truly mad. And because it feels like we've been talking Game of Thrones forever, because you and I have. For those who are unaware, the reason that Gwen and I are friends in the first place, the reason we initially connected, is because all the way back in like the 2017, 2018, 2019 era, we connected on what was the website formerly known as Twitter, talking about Game of Thrones. And then that conversation between us has never stopped. But for a variety of reasons, the original Game of Thrones show wrapping up, House of the Dragon, we both love the show, but we just haven't gotten to it on the channel. It's basically, we've had all of our Game of Thrones discussions, out of the public eye almost, and there are reasons for that. But this show was just, it's like this felt like the right time and place to finally bring some of that love we both have for this world out into the open.
Yeah, and really, it's a wonderful show to begin with. I feel. Before we get into that, I launched right into that, but just because we have recently relaunched the channel, I want to take the time to introduce ourselves in case we have anybody new. My name is Gwen. This is my co-host Jared, and this is Cinematic Realms, a place you can come for movie and TV discussions without like glowing red eyes in the thumbnail, because we are, positive people, and we want to talk about the stuff we love in a positive manner. That'll be tested next week when we do our Oscar stream. Um, but yeah, so tonight we're talking about the HBO original series A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And there's been a long build up to this because, as we've said, we're both huge Game of Thrones fans, and we basically became friends thanks to Game of Thrones, are commiserating for the reaction to season 8, which, of course, notice the background.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's very intentional. We won't belabor that because that's not what the stream is about. But at an undetermined point in the future, we'll be getting there, and
We
we
will.
will have a lot of fun doing that. A lot of you may not have fun with that, but we will. Um, but yeah, so we basically just been keeping our uh Game of Thrones, discussions just to each other, and like, we've had our own personal watch parties that we've done, and we chat back and forth about the shows, the uh on the Slack group that we belong to. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun, but this felt like the right opportunity to bring that out in the open and talk about this absolutely wonderful show, which I actually watched the entire season, rewatched the entire season today in one sitting, which was a lot of fun.
No, I mean, and like I watched it both last night and then finished it up this morning. It's easier to do that when it's a smaller scale show with shorter episodes and a shorter episode run. I feel like even for the two of us being such massive fans, like trying to get like 10 episodes of like the original show or House of the Dragon in a single day or two might have been a tall order, but this show it went down nice and easy.
Yeah, I think even like Once Upon a Time, I was more likely to do like half a season in one sitting. Like when I was really, I was both younger and fanatical about the show. So, but yeah, 10 episodes in one sitting, that
Yeah.
I think the only thing I've ever done that for was and I'm trying to think if it was 10 episodes. Yeah, it was. It was the second half of Battlestar Galactica season 4, which was the first season of that show, I think, to come out on Blu-ray. Um, or it was or was the first new season to come out, maybe. And I remember I came home, got that, and I was so excited to have a season of the show in HD because that was still when we were transitioning from DVD to Blu-ray, and so I watched all 10 episodes as soon as I got it. So that's the only time I've ever done something like that, aside from the Lord of the Rings, which I have done at least one marathon viewing of the entire trilogy. So, but as we get older, that gets a little tougher.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's talk about this amazing show. I certainly think it's amazing. What are your overall impressions of the season, Jared?
I concur that it is amazing, and all the more so because I will have to acknowledge that as much as I, love this show and love this world, like in the time leading up to it, I was excited, but I think my excitement level was not quite as high as it had been for previous seasons of Game of Thrones and the House of the Dragon, and it was just because I knew that it was going to be a smaller scale story. And I also acknowledge I have not at this time read the original Dunk and Egg novellas that this show is based on. I'm going to be changing that soon.
Oh, we've lost Jared. He must have pressed the wrong button. Anyway, so I'll talk a little bit of. Oh, I know he's coming back. All right,
Sorry, I was so excited I hit the wrong button. But
flippy fingers.
yeah, indeed. But yeah, like I said, I fell in love with this show, like in a surprising way, I would say, because you know, Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are very, dark and heavy shows, and that's part of the thing that we love about them is that they deal with the complexities of the real world. And I knew that, with in the case of Dunk and Egg, it was going to be set at a less turbulent time in Westeros's history, focused more on the two, lead characters. And I'm like, I'm just going to want to check out the vibe. And the vibe at the end of the first episode was to my surprise. When I finished, I was like, that was sweet. That was nice. I like that. Which again, I've had my mind blown by Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon on so many occasions that it was kind of a pleasant, change of pace to actually go through a show. And I'm like, nothing revolutionary happened there, but I liked spending time with these characters. And then that vibe continued through the next couple of episodes, all the way up to the end of episode 4, where a certain moment happens, and specifically a certain musical cue happens. And then I was like, hell yes, here we are. This is Game of Thrones, baby. And ever since then, the rest of the season just left me on a soaring high.
Yeah, I pretty much yeah, I know what you mean that we get to that point in episode 4, but I think for me, like part of the joy of this show was just the fact that I actually love the way that episode 1 ends because it's not some big jaw-dropping Game of Thrones cliffhanger moment. It basically, it's bringing things kind of full circle for Dunk in a way in that first episode where we start off with him mourning the loss of Sir Arlen and learning that he was uh this Knight Squire, and and we see the stuff about Dunk saying, "You never beat me except when I deserved it." And then the end of the episode comes back, I won't beat you, and not unless you deserve. But the point is, like, all this stuff recurred. It was like it was seeing that Dunk was taking on Edge in the way that he was taken on a bit,
Mhm.
and so it was a nice, beautiful, full circle character moment to close out the episode. And it felt nice because we've become accustomed to Game of Thrones, where the end of the episode hits and it's a big like, what the fuck just happened? Or it was nice that this show is doing something different, even though we have those big moments as they come in the story, but I think this show, not that Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon doesn't do this, but I think it was more pronounced how this show is more reliant on sort of our love and affection for the characters over like big twists and turns.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
no, I
yeah,
I would agree because this this is fundamentally a relationship, a show about a relationship between two characters, two very different characters. You know, the humble Hedge Knight in is Sir Duncan. You know, from originally from Flea Bottom and having grown up in living a very hard life with a lot of tragedy and loss, and but still retaining his like fundamentally good nature, and a young boy who would be king or will be king eventually, but who is and who is still at a very important crossroads in his life, because as we later see, even though young boys who are young and sweet, sometimes do not stay that way. And
yeah,
there's a very interesting moment in later in the series where we learn that like perhaps had Egg not crossed paths with Sir Duncan the Tall, he might have grown up to be a very different man. And but he did. And that is just one of those moments, and that I think that the show has a lot of those moments. It's asking questions essentially about, you know, did these things happen for a reason? Do the gods, such as they are in this world, have a plan for Sir Duncan the Tall and Prince Aegon Targaryen? And they very much do. But at this moment, it just feels like it's happy chance, a happy accident, that these two their paths cross, and then it seems like it's a much less happy chance and less and happy accident because a lot of tragedy starts to unfold. But by the end, when these two characters have come back together and are on the road together and they have chosen to be together for now, it just feels like it's such a richly earned moment. And to quote, the ending of a very famous and beloved movie, Casablanca, it feels like the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
yeah. Yeah. So, but just talking about my overall view of the season, I just loved it so much. Especially it's funny when the show, when we initially got the news that the show was going to be 6 episodes, half an hour episodes, I was a little bit like, oh, but I understood it at the same time because, being based on the novella, The Hedge Knights, like, it's a short story, not a short, well, a novella, as I said, not quite a short story, longer than a short story, but shorter than a novel. So you wouldn't want them to drag it out unnecessarily. So, um, but watching it today, I was just that went from kind of sort of acceptance of that to just love at how the whole thing was crafted. And it did feel like watching it today, it felt basically like, you know, a a 3.5 hour, and medieval film where they didn't have to cut out all those wonderful character beats. And and so yeah, I just loved it. I loved, the performances, the sort of the good nature of the story, because and it's the same reason why I really loved reading The Hedge Knight so much, was because it was a bit of a, there's some stuff that happens that is, it's not all happy go lucky, but it just feels like such a turn from, what we usually get in the Game of Thrones world, which is that, you know, the bad guys win, the world sucks, There's still a little bit of that. Uh, and like, basically good is dumb, and if you try to be good, you're gonna get your head cut off. Um, and so that's why this story is so wonderful, because even though there are sad things that happen in the story, and good intentions go awry, but it rewards honor and good intentions, and and it's just the kind of it's funny. I was watching a little snippet the other day of an interview that Seth MacFarlane did with Ted Danson, as a matter of fact, on his podcast. And he was talking about how when he was growing up, there were stories of, you know, like good people trying to do good things. And nowadays, ever since like Tony Soprano, it's all like, how dark can we get? We want the tortured anti-hero. Um, or, the bordering on villain. And so it's nice to get a corner of this world
Mhm.
where it's centered on two good, likable characters.
Mhm.
You don't need that. Like it is good to have the other kind of story, but I do feel like the balance for a while has been tipped in the direction of how dark and moody can we get, and how much can we get the audience to at least be ambivalent about, our characters. So every once in a while, it's nice to see a story where you can completely root for someone, and you know and it doesn't there's some tragedy, but it doesn't end in like total, you know sort of dystopia.
And I think
and
that's
and so I just really responded to that, and that's the feeling I had at the end of this season, especially as the music swelled, at the end, and it was just like, that was a nice story, and I can't wait to see these characters again.
No, I'm gonna. I think it has something to do with the world that we're living in at this point too. Like I'm gonna shout
Yeah,
out Casterly Talk, which is a podcast that Ken Knapsack and Alden Diaz do on Game of Thrones. And Alden had raised the point in one of the episodes discussing this show about Kevin Smith had a kind of a quote where he talked about the kind of fluctuating popularity of Superman versus Batman, and how sometimes when the world is, going along in kind of a smoother, happier place, time, Batman rises in popularity because people start kind of craving that like darker edge, that feels like it's missing from the world. And conversely, when times are dark and hard and people are looking for light and hope, that's when Superman starts to kind of stage a comeback. And, we got a Superman movie last year that we talked about on this channel that was very much in line with those themes. And I think it's kind of a similar dynamic with Game of Thrones because, while there were obviously still problems in the world, back in the early 2010s, it was a little bit of a lighter time, relatively speaking. And
yeah,
I think that Game of Thrones came at exactly the right time where people had this love for the Lord of the Rings, and Game of Thrones was set in a very similar fantasy milieu, but it had a harder, more realistic edge that I think people really responded to. And and House of the Dragon very similarly. But this show was coming out at the time when, not to get into specifics, but the world feels much darker, and it is sometimes nice and rewarding to see that there is still can be value and entertainment and lessons that can be gathered in the stories of seeing ultimately fundamentally good people making their way through a difficult world by being themselves and being and being honorable to the best extent they can, and trying to do the right thing and to live by the knightly virtues of you know defending the innocent, and standing up for truth and justice and what is right, and to ultimately, despite the hardships inherent to that, be rewarded for it and vindicated for it, because that is the hope that we need. And there's a beautiful moment about the story of hope that I think will discuss later in the channel, or in the stream. But I think that that's why the show at this particular moment feels like the show that we need.
I completely agree. And yeah, we'll be able to touch on Superman next week.
Yeah.
Even though we did a whole stream on it, I will touch on again just like that film's message of hope and why it resonates so much right now. And so yeah, this is kind of the same thing. And and certainly beyond the sort of climate we're in, you know you know, as a nation, like, you know, just it was a couple of years ago when things took a really dark turn for me with the loss of my mom, and what did I gravitate towards? The Rings of Power. I went with Lord of the Rings was the thing that I took comfort in, even though there was a brand new Game of Thrones show called House of the Dragon, and I was enjoying it very much, but it wasn't what I needed right then. And so yeah, I think there's great power in these stories of good people, doing good things. Which is why, like, I've always been a staunch Ned Stark defender. Uh, you know, I've heard people call his actions like stupid. It's like, why aren't you like doing the smart thing? And it's like, well, he's an honorable man and he's trying to do the best he can. And it takes great bravery to be an honorable man in an unjust world. And so that's for me why he's always been one of my absolute favorite characters in all of Game of Thrones. And it's why I gravitate so much to you know a character like Dunk, in this story. And we're going to talk a lot about like Dunk's honor and the way he goes about things, but we're going to save that for just a little bit. Right now, the next thing I want to go into, I want to talk about the relationship between Dunk and Egg, which is the core of this show. But I just like we can get into the more serious things about their relationship, but the first thing I want to call out is like I really just loved this when I was watching today is God bless Dunk, but like he will just like Egg is like telling him, and people are always telling me that I'm short even for my age, and Dunk says people are always calling me stupid, and it just sits there and waits, and he's like, and
Yeah.
what? And then he goes like, which that is something that I do all the time when somebody says something to me that makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I love their dynamic. It's they obviously grow to care about each other very much, but there's also this brotherly antagonism between them as well, which I just find so endearing. And like, yeah, and bottom line being like, we cannot underestimate the impact that their chemistry has on this season. It is absolutely key to the show, and I thought casting just knocked this out of the park.
No, I mean this show is, among many other things, yet another triumph of casting in the Game of Thrones universe, and specifically in casting of younger performers, because the original Game of Thrones show famously hit an absolute home run with the casting of the young Stark children, and the Lannister children. I would argue as well. And then House of the Dragon also had hit an absolute home run with the casting of young Rhaenyra and young Alicent. And this show, once again has performed the miraculous feat of finding these two young, relatively inexperienced performers. Obviously, Dexter Solantel, who plays Egg, is a child, so he is very much, this is very much his start in the industry. But Peter Clappy, who plays Dunk, he is older, but he just is a relatively new to acting as well. He was a rugby player by trade before deciding to transition into acting, and he had done a couple of things before this, but I certainly had never seen him in anything before. And just immediately, you would never know that this guy is relatively an acting novice because it just feels so naturalistic. All of his interactions with everyone in the cast, including Egg, and Dexter, who plays Egg. Like, you watch any behind the scenes interviews with him, and his enthusiasm for the character and the story is just so infectious that you can't help but smile at anything that he does.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I brought up that moment is because that scene, I think, really demonstrates some of his like instincts for like um for comedy, but like really insightful and like beyond his age, like comedic instincts.
Yeah.
I know that I was not that witty as in the, what, a 10-year-old or however old he's supposed to be. And so I'm just watching it and I'm like, you know, and obviously part of that is, Egg is not just any kid, he's grown up a prince. And so like, that's a different exposure to like, different people like and situations. And so but it's just like I'm like you're canny, you're a canny one.
Uh, and they're as you said, like they play off of each other so well because it really is an older brother, younger brother dynamic. Even though they're not playing siblings by blood, and there's supposed to be a power dynamic, but Dunk really is a big kid in a lot of ways, and Egg is because of his intelligence and his experience, is in many ways wise beyond his years. But they, like, when they're together, they just get to be, at least before the story, Egg's true identity is revealed and the story takes a darker turn. They get to just be like, buddies and friends and brothers together. Like, I think about the scene when they're watching the tournament, they start mimicking each other's voices. He's like, oh, I'm Sir Duncan, and I don't know what to do when I talk to women. Yeah, it's like, well, I'm Egg, and I can't even drink a pint of ale. Yeah, because it's disgusting. You're just like, this is, it's very like modern humor in that sense, but it's instantly relatable to anyone who has had a connection with a sibling or a close friend like that.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, for Ed, because you know pretty much all his relationships are with family members of varying quality, uh,
Yeah.
to put it mildly. And and that's not a great way to like, and that's why when it comes to the end of the season and make our response to Dunk's request to take and Edge away from his environment, he says, and his family, and it's like, yeah, honestly, that might be a healthy thing for anybody, let alone let alone a Targaryen. So yeah, so I think like he latches on to Dunk because he senses in him someone who is good and honorable, and I think the more time they spend together, like he doesn't just want to go run away. He wants to go off with Dunk and have and he likes this guy and he wants to like have this relationship with him, this brotherly, but also, but there's a bit of a, even a father son dynamic, because Dunk is older. Probably less so than in real life. I think I think Dunk is supposed to be. Yeah, I think is there only a few years difference, like story wise, between them actually, but he's just so freaking tall.
You think it's another one of those cases where essentially the actor has been, because of the actor has been essentially aged up with the character. Like I think, in the original Game of Thrones novels, famously, all of the Stark children and Dany are like 13
Okay.
years old, which was not, workable for an HBO series. And so they aged up the characters with the actors. And I think it's similar with Dunk, because I think Dunk is supposed to be like only 16 or 17 in the novella, and Peter
Okay.
Claffey is 29. So, and they don't, so, and I think that it's kind of, they're just, playing into it without making it clear. Maybe he's supposed to be playing closer to 21 or 22, but
Yeah.
I think that they're yeah.
But when you're a little kid,
Mhm.
like, even a smaller age difference is a big age difference, because when you're playing a kid who's only been on Earth for like 10, 11 years, every year is enormous. But so basically what I'm saying is that I think there is a hint of like a sort of father figure that maybe Ed wants to have, but it's mixed with this sort of brotherly dynamic as well. And just like Dunk, latched onto Sir Arlen, who saved his life. It's Ed sees in Dunk a lot of things that he admires, and maybe he wishes that he saw more of in his own family, and gets a glimpse of what maybe he would rather have for his own life, rather than what he's lived. And so, yeah, I just think it's a great dynamic, and um, how Dunk just keeps trying to like keep him in line, and it's like you just the constant. Do you want to clout in the air? And Ed will just keep going on and on. And it's great. I love it. Right down to the you know, there's nine kingdoms actually, and
Which is such a great little moment to end on that with the title card, because it's one of those things where the show gets to engage with like the meta textual
yeah,
elements of the story, because we've wondered about that. We know why it's called the Seven Kingdoms, because that's what they were when Aegon conquered them. But I'm like, technically there are 9 administrative regions of Westeros. I know you don't count the Iron Islands and the Crown Lands among the kingdoms, but actually they're their own thing. And you're just like, yeah, Egg with his kind of childlike wisdom is like, yeah, everybody else is wrong. There are 9 kingdoms.
and and when Dunk misunderstands about the Kingsguard member, you know, son, and Egg's like, his father owns the fishing, whatever in Westeros, and Dunk's reply of
Yeah. Oh my God.
Peter Claffey is just so good.
Yeah.
He's so great at like playing that Dunk is really trying to be present himself as a bit smarter than maybe he is.
Yeah. No, I mean he doesn't have the same level of experience that Egg does with like the complicated politics of the world, and it comes out in certain awkward moments, and often certain very humorous moments. I particularly love the moment when he is attempting to flirt with Tanzel for guarding the shield, and the whole like she's like, they used to call me Tanzel too tall, and he's like, you're not too tall, and Egg is like, what are you doing? But then he
Just
also
like
went.
that nonverbal like
Yeah, he's like, you're gonna ruin the good thing I've got going here with the puppet show. But then also when Dunk sees Tanzel and is making like heart shaped eyes at her later, and Egg is like, ooh, he's like, shut up.
That's the
Again,
thing, like, I again, like, and you alluded to this with the comedy, like, so many of Ed's reactions and their back and forth in general leans a bit more into like contemporary real world humor than I think this universe has in it. But tonally it fits with the story, and so I just found it really endearing. But
yeah,
yeah, and then obviously their relationship gets more complex as the story goes on and after the reveal happens at the end of episode 3, and and there's some heartbreaking stuff with like when Ed goes in to apologize, and dumps doesn't take it easy on him, and but you can see how much that hurts Ed as well, um and then like just to see his eyes sort of light up, like at the trial, then um when Dunk brings back you better be here when I get back, you know, or I'll go after you with dogs. And it goes, "Ruff," and like that's such a wonderful moment. And and so it's great to see that despite the sort of the trials that their relationship goes through, that what we get at the end of the season is what's been at the heart of that relationship throughout the entire season. And yeah, I just think that's going to be one of the great things. It already is, but it's going to continue to be one of the great things about this show as it moves forward.
no, absolutely, because these characters are going to be our constants. One of the bittersweet tragedies of the nature of this particular show is that we get to meet an entire swath of wonderful characters in this season, and most of them aren't going to be back for season 2, which so we're going to have to meet new friends. But Dunk and Egg will be our constants. And in the meantime, I say bittersweet because the sweetness is just evident with so many of the other characters we get a chance to encounter in this story. Both like and yeah, and I'm gonna miss them all terribly, but they
Well,
did
this
their job.
is actually wonderful because this is the next thing I want to go into, which we're going to call this segment "Friends of Dunk,"
Yes.
because because he makes lots of friends as he arrives for the tourney in Ashford, and we really can't start anywhere but with the laughing storm himself, Sir Lionel Baratheon. Look at this man.
Oh
Uh,
man.
I'm just yeah. He's just amazing. I couldn't wait for his character pretty much since that first teaser.
Yeah.
Um, where we get the slightly edited for the teaser, so it's like part of a longer speech, but in the show, it's the seven above, graced you with tallness, so be tall. And it's just like he's got such magnetism about him, and like what's so great is that like if you come into the show not knowing the novella, that first scene we get with him seems like it could go either way, because he seems like he could be a powder keg like ready to go off. And we've seen these kind of scenarios before where you don't want to piss off the wrong lord. Poor Dungeon, all he wants is supper.
Oh my.
And he goes in there, and Lionel is just like, who the fuck is this guy, and why is he in my tent?
And then when Dunk offers up his explanation, he's like, actually makes sense. And then they're off and running. But yeah, I again with the triumph of casting Daniel Ings, who plays Sir Lionel Baratheon. He most definitely. The second I looked at him, I'm like, oh yeah, this is Robert Baratheon's ancestor, and this is Renly Baratheon's ancestor. It's almost like the two of them fused into one person. I don't see much of Stannis in him, but Stannis was always kind of an outlier a little bit in the Baratheon family.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lionel. It's telling that like in episode 1, we meet Dunk and Egg, and we love them both. But Lionel Baratheon really kind of steals the first episode. It's like at the end, but the biggest talking points at the end of the first episode, mostly because we don't have a big action sequence or anything to go on, is Lionel Baratheon, dancing in the tent with his tongue out.
Before we started the stream, we talked about this. You posted the GIF of that for to advertise the stream, and it's just so great. And I just love it. It's like, do you like to dance? And doesn't everybody? And the grin comes across his face, and then just cuts to him going,
Yeah. Yeah, which again is like very almost like a modern, anachronistic kind of dance, because that's not what we think of when we think of medieval dancing. This is much more like almost like he's at a rave essentially, and that moment when he is he's like trying to get Dunk to be a little bit more free with his movement, so he's like almost trying to step on his toes, and then Dunk actually steps on his toes, and then he looks up with him, and you're like, oh no, did he just make a terrible faux pas? And then Lionel's just like, yeah. Dunk shoves him, and then it's like off to the races, and you're just like,
and then we cut to them both fully drunk and like just chilling out, and Dunk's wearing the crown, and it's just, oh my god, it's so great. Like, if anything, like the Lionel stuff in this first episode, like sets us up for a little bit of disappointment because he's never in quite as much of the show. Again, after this, he's obviously is of great importance, but like we get so much great Lionel stuff in this first episode that it's kind of like, can he just be a main character like in the entire show? Which is why I'm very hopeful that like I know like the stories are pretty much set in stone for what we're gonna get for seasons 2 and 3 because we have the novellas, but I really hope we get a Lionel return. If not something off book from what I already, at least post season 3, I hope he makes his way back into the show. Because it's just too brilliant of a character for him to just be a one season wonder.
Yeah. No, I would agree, and I'm very excited because the actor Daniel Engs is in the cast of Star Wars Starfighter next year, and now I can't wait to see what he does with that role. But his role as Lionel here, as you said, even though he's episode 1 is really kind of his episode that he is like a big part of, but he's a consistent presence in every single episode, and he has a great moment, like including in the tug of war scene where he recruits Dunk to heed his call to war, and then he pieces the fuck out in the middle of the thing because he's thirsty. He does come back and they win, and then he has the big another big singing and dancing moment in episode 3 with the Alice with 3 fingers song, and then he gets to be heroic in episode 4, joining Dunk's group of 7, and obviously he's fighting in episode 5. That's probably the one when we see the least of him, but we still get some great moments. And then episode 6. When he's kind of, counseling Dunk afterwards, he has what I think, there are so many great jokes in this series, but he has what I think is probably my single favorite joke in the first season when Dunk is lying there under the tree and the maester comes. He's like, "Sir, your wounds have mortified. I'm afraid he's dying." He's like, "The others fucking killed me. Get the fuck out of here." He's like, "It's fine. You're fine. He's a terrible maester."
Like, an itchy asshole is beyond your abilities. Get out of here.
Yes.
Which, what's so funny is he's absolutely right. Like, Dunk ends up being fine.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know if that is a House Baratheon maester or just a maester like of where are they? where's the
Ash,
term?
Ashford.
Yeah, and or if it's an Ashford Maester. I'm assuming the latter. But I sort of think it would be funnier if it was actually a Lionel's own Maester.
I actually think I lean more into that because he seems so familiar with it. Like, it's not a like, what do you mean you can't fix this? It's more of just like, of fucking course you're gonna say you can't fix this wound. That it's clearly not a fatal wound, and it's just like, get out of it. Yeah, I'm used to this. He's like, I've had scratches before. He's like, this is beyond my heel, my lord. You're about to die, and he's like, oh, fuck off.
And then there's the whole come with me, I'll love you like your brother. And when or say no and I'll hate you like your brother.
Which again is very apropos of the
Yeah.
Baratheon family tree.
Yeah. Um I'm also like not opposed to like I'm sure I haven't looked online, but I have no doubt that there is shipping of Lionel and Dunk.
Oh yeah, no,
I
I'm sure there is.
I even feel like there's a case to be made for some validity on Lionel's side of it.
Oh, I think so. I mean, like it's never, as you said, explicitly coded, but like I do think
Yeah,
that Lionel kind of reads as like pansexual, basically. It's just
yeah,
like he will let's say have conjugal relations with anything that moves, as long as it's more intriguing to him than his brutally dull home life at Storm's End.
yeah. Um, okay, so moving through, I'm saving some of the big hitters of a certain family tree for our next section, but we'll talk about some of these other characters. I feel like I have to do justice to the absolutely oh wait, sorry, even with me, you guys know how I am with names. I just want to make sure I get them right. Um Sorry, I've got my cast list here. Okay, Raymond. Yeah, let's give some praise to who will become Sir Raymond Fossilway. Um, I honestly, there's a case to be made that he's the MVP for the whole show because talk about a guy who's in Dunk's corner from the get go. Um, but yeah, I he's got an absolutely wretched cousin, but but Raymond's a good guy, and yeah, I just I love the fact that, in the face of his cousin's betrayal, at the trial, like, he doesn't even, miss a beat. He's just immediately like, "Knight me," you know? He's by that point, he's ride or die, for Duncan, and also he knows, like, he knows the difference between right and wrong, and he's willing to stand up for what's right, and, um I just love that he's always like going up to Hunter and being like, "Are you hungry?" And and
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
he's no. I was just gonna say he's like, when I talked about this show being like so sweet. Like Raymond is one of those. Raymond is one of those characters who embodies the sweetness, because from the moment he and Dunk cross paths, when Dunk's kind of inadvertent intervention saved Raymond from being beaten up by his cousin Sir Stefan, and then every time he sees him after that, he's just like, Dunk, my friend, my buddy. It's like, you're hungry? You want to get a cup of cider? We make it ourselves. And Dunk, it's like, it's rare we see like this kind of non-transactional friendship in Westeros, where
Yeah,
it's like, yes, Raymond is technically like highborn, but he's on, as he says, he's on the lower branches of the Fossaway apple tree, and he's clearly not very well treated by his cousin Sir Stefan, and he's so happy to have somebody that he can talk to, and I agree, like he instantly became one of my favorite characters, and and all the more so because there was one of the very few things I had heard of before the show, like from this fragment of a review I had seen floating around, was there's a character in the show who's very Podrick Payne coded, and the second Raymond shows up, I'm like, oh, that's him. All the more so by the end when we learn that, you know, he, like Podrick, he has a way with with the ladies. But his bromance with Dunk is just delightful. And the actor Sean Thomas, like, you know, he just brings such wonderful heart and humor to the character. And he also, in speaking of favorite moments, he has one of my favorite line deliveries in the entire show that has just lived rent-free in my mind since I heard it, which is when they're in the tent talking about Aryan and the Targaryens. He's like, "The incestuous aliens, Duncan." I love it so much.
I loved it because like then he just goes off, and it's like, it's honestly like, it just reminded of like me when I like get my engine revved up about politics, and like everything I'll say is something I firmly believe, but I'll detect that I perhaps have gone just a bit too far in my zeal, and it's like might have gotten a little carried away. But yeah, I just I loved him, thought he was great. And yeah, his cousin Stefan, or Sir Stevron,
Yeah.
is awful. But you know what, the actor's name is Edward Ashley, but he very much reminded me of the actor Sean Harris, who mostly, I say mostly because not all the time, but most of the time he plays a real asshole. And so as soon as I saw this guy, it's like, even if I didn't know the novella, like I would already think this guy was a piece of shit.
Yeah.
But I do say most of the time because I want to tip my cap to Sean Harris's portrayal of King Arthur in the great film The Green Knight. Because in that case, he plays a very good man. So, but yeah, and like, but that actor does such a great job of, first of all, convincing us of like how awful Stefan is, but then sort of convincing us that maybe it's like he puts on that image for show, but deep down, like, this is a guy who will at least respect what Dunk did, and he plays it so sincerely when, you know, he says, "I'm for you, Sir Duncan," you know, and so much to the point where, like, even though we shouldn't have been shocked, it's like when he comes back, you know, at the trial, and yeah, he's a piece of shit. It's like, oh god damn it.
Yeah. I mean, he feels like he's the character who, you know, wandered in from the set of the original Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. It's like, don't you know how this works around here? You backstab and you sell people out for a lordship when you have the opportunity. Other men have traded their honor for far less. And it just so happens he's in the one, you know, show so far in the Westeros oeuvre where, you know, maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe you should have, you know, actually tried to stand up for your knightly virtues and not you know, tried to screw Duncan over. But you know, he gets his comeuppance in the end, because like that great moment when Raymond in the final episode is basically like, first, you know, he's just sad that he lost, because first trial of 7 in 100 years, and Sir Stefan got beat by his little cousin, and you know, he's got that big smile on his face, and it's again one of those, again, good guys win, bad guys lose moments that this show like delivers on in the most wonderfully unexpected way.
I don't think that's the number one reason he has his smile on his face, but
it's the second. It's the second, because, you know, like, you know, Raymond's in a good spot. He's got a beautiful new wife who's expecting already. Funny how that works. And I just absolutely positively love that Dunk sees, he's like, even Dunk, who is not perhaps the quickest on the uptake, clocks immediately what's going on here, because he's met obviously Red or Rowan before and knows that she is in fact, a lady of the night. But he's just like, the smile on Raymond's face is just so genuine. He's just like, I'm happy for you, buddy.
Um, and yeah, so let's next definitely want to talk about the absolutely wonderful Tenzel, played by Tenzin Crawford. Um, another one of these people who you're like sad is not going to be in the show for the next couple seasons. She plays an enormously important part in this season of the show. But then, like, one of the first truly intelligent characters in Game of Thrones history gets the fuck out of Dodge when she should. And yeah, but her, like, she's just so wonderful, and her scenes, both doing the puppet shows and then, in her scenes with, Duncan Egg and yeah, I just she's absolutely wonderful, and and then playing that absolute fear when she sees Arian, has walked into the tent, and um yeah, I really hope we see her again, and yeah, it's I like I do like how she's is sort of patient with Dunk, it's like, because also it's like, and I do wonder if, like, I've wondered about this, like, ever since I read the novella, and also, like, are they going to run into it? I imagine they will. Like, it seems like a pretty good setup for them to meet again. And but then I'm also like, seeing the way it's played in the show, is she interested in him, or is she just like amused by him? And then does that change after, um, after he comes to her defense? Not certainly not enough to stick around, thank God. But yeah, it's a relationship that I'm very much looking forward to see continued, hopefully at some point in the future. Um, both because of, the character herself and her interactions, but also just I think it was the actress just played it beautifully.
I agree. I mean, I think even Ira Parker, the showrunner, has dropped some hints that if this show does indeed extend beyond season 3, that there would be room for a character like Tanzel to come back. And I hope she does, because the connection between her and Dunk is, again, just one of those moments where it's just like, this is so sweet. It's not going to work out for the moment, but yeah, like Duncan is, I think they said as much in the post episode in commentaries. Dunk is just immediately smitten with her, and why would you not be? Because she's beautiful. She is tall, which, is, as a tall guy myself, I can say what height on a woman is a plus. I don't think she's as like smitten with him as he is with her, but I think she is intrigued by his forthrightness and his essentially lack of guile. That moment where he is, in a certain respect, kind of about to make a fool of himself because he came to her to have her paint his shield, and she's like, "What would you like?" And he's like, "I don't know." And he's like, "You must think me a fool." And she takes that moment to echo the line from the play, like a moment of kindness: "All men are fools, all men are knights." Which, if it isn't that, if that just doesn't, like, speak to the themes of this show and this world, I think that I think it's perfect.
Yeah, and which just reminds me, I really love, like, how we get to see through the puppet show, a glimpse at the story of, Florian the Fool, and just because I remember, like, just reading about that in the original novels, and like especially from Sansa's POV. chapters and stuff, and there isn't really, they don't make much of that in the Game of Thrones show, if at all. I think it's like, if you know about it, like the context is there, like with who's um the character in Thrones, who
Sir
becomes
Dantos.
Sir Danto. So like, if like that's there so that for readers, we know sort of, um more about the context of that from like, from the original books, but they didn't really have room to go into it in the show, and so I just loved seeing that story represented here, um and yeah, it was a lot of fun seeing those puppet shows put together, especially like, I remember when the teaser came out and people who didn't know like the
Mhm.
novellas and stuff, they were like, "Oh, there's a dragon in the show." It's like, nope, the
Kind of.
dragons are gone. That's a puppet.
Yes, indeed. But I appreciated that we got a nod to it, because of
Yeah,
course this is still a Game of Thrones show. We expect there to be dragons in some form, and the fact that the
yeah,
Targaryens no longer have their dragons, become is a major, reason why they're essentially deigning to descend upon this tournament in the first place, almost as like a diplomatic mission. And of course, the puppet becomes very important when a character we'll talk about later, Arian, sees it and starts brutalizing Tanzel. And the moment when Dunk immediately jumps in to defend her honor is really kind of the linchpin of the entire story, because it is the moment when he is acting like a true knight would and should under ideal circumstances. The idea of the knightly vows. In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave. In the name of the father, I charge you to be just. In the name of the mother, I charge you to defend the innocent. And
yeah,
in this moment, it is brave, just, and just what Dunk is doing to defend the honor of Tanzel, even if he didn't, have romantic feelings for her. She is in this moment, someone who is doing absolutely nothing wrong, and a powerful man is taking advantage of her because of a perceived slight that was not even directed at him, uh, and is making her, and the punishment he's exacting on her far outseeds whatever supposed crime she's committing. And Dunk instantly recognizes that, and uh, you know fear and consequences be damned, in that moment he acts. And ultimately the show kind of sets us up to think, like, did Dunk do the right thing in this world? Because we know like what a terrible crime it is for him to strike a prince. But morally, from our perspective in the real world, there is no doubt, absolutely, he did the right thing there.
yeah. And that's what I was talking about, like, the different shows. Like, I feel like in the original show, like, you could almost call that decision a stupid one with a straight face, because that's what we come to expect from the universe where good intentions are not rewarded. Scheming is. And but what's so beautiful about this show is that there is no question what the right thing to do in that moment is. Um and I love that. Like, there's not even a moment of him thinking about it. He just completely like jumps in and does exactly, what his conscience dictates. And yeah, it's great. Before we that is a good segue to like go into our next section. But before we do that, um there is one side character that I'm going to save uh, for just a little bit, because I think there's a really good spot to talk about him. But one more I want to get into before we go to our next section is the character of Plumber, who I really enjoyed, just because, again, like, setting up the sort of tone of the show. We get him with whatever it is he does with his breathing and swallowing or whatever, or nasal congestion. But I just loved this guy, and yeah, he ends up like bringing a pretty shady deal to Sir Duncan. But on the whole, I would say he's a pretty good guy, because he does try to help Dunk out in some ways. It really Dunk does not get any further than this room if he doesn't call after Dunk and say, if you find someone to vouch for you, you know, we'll be able to let you in. So I don't know. I like Plumber. I think he's really funny.
Yeah.
And it's a big contributor to setting the tone for the show, I think.
Yeah, I was a little sad because he kind of disappears in the back half of the season, but in the first 3 episodes, he is, he's such a wonderful, like, just character in every way. And the actor, Tom Von Lawler, the thing I had seen him in before in a very different context was in the Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. He played Ebony Maw under heavy motion capture, and in that he was a very
Wow.
malevolent character. And here it's like you would never draw the connection between those two.
I had no idea.
Yeah, but in this
You know
case,
what?
yeah,
Now when I go back to watch those movies, I'm going to enjoy that character a lot more now.
yeah, no, when he's basically like, rejoice, for Thanos has come to save your souls by destroying half your world, and then here you got Plumber going, oh. And telling his story about the Ashford chair, and then he's like, I'm bullshitting you.
Which might be
uh,
my favorite delivery of bullshitting ever. I'm bullshitting you.
yeah. Um, but as you said, like this is another one of those cases where Dunk simply by being himself and being kind of like guileless and earnest in his approach, like essentially charms almost everyone he meets. In at least among the non-highborn lords. Because Plumber, as you said, in a different context, could have just been like, get out of here, guy. We don't have anyone to vouch for you. You can't enter the tournament. But he softens towards him almost immediately. And then there's that moment when he's facing, he goes to see the Targaryens, and he's kind of overstepping his bounds, and Plumber's there like, don't do it. Don't do it. But then when he comes later to offer him basically the illegal sports betting scheme that's familiar to anyone who is essentially he's shorting the stock at this moment, and he's like, obviously this is an underhanded and dirty and dishonorable thing, but he's doing it in many respects for the right reasons, and because he's trying to look after the financial well-being of his house. And he could have gone to anyone with this, like a more disreputable knight. And in this case, he's like, you know, he's almost trying to do something good for Dunk here. He's like, I know, like, this is, you're trying to get your start in this world, and like this would help you, and Dunk, I think, it's a little unclear because obviously circumstances unfold, but I wonder at that moment when Dunk and him kind of pass each other midway through episode 3 and they exchange a look, I do wonder if that was Dunk saying like, all right, because he does say like, I suppose, Sir Andrew and I would be equally matched. Like maybe he was coming around on the idea, but then he never gets the chance.
He actually even says that after that encounter in the street with the plumber. So I think the fact that he's sort of setting that up as an expectation, like to Raymond, I think he's considering it at the very least. I don't know where he would have landed on that. Circumstances intervene, but um, on the one hand, like it doesn't really seem to like it just based off of the kind of person that Dunk is. I want to say that like eventually I feel like he's not going to go for it. But on the other hand, like this is also the Game of Thrones world, and you're kind of like, honestly, it's a good deal for
Yeah.
someone of in his circumstances. Like it's not the honorable thing to do, but um but he could very easily, like, if what happens doesn't like happen in the story, like he goes up for his first tilt, he very easily gets his ass handed to him. He loses, his possessions, and he just has a very, he's in a very bad, you know, situation. And so like I don't blame Dunk for considering it. So
I would.
yeah. Um And then also I do want to, like, we mentioned her little bit. I want to just mention Rowan again. I really loved her character.
Yeah.
Especially there's this great moment where he goes into the tent. The, her and the other girl are like setting up with the third girl. Like, sometimes I don't want to ask too many questions about
No,
what's going to be going on there.
yeah, the sexual proclivities of Westeros. Like, let's just say that this is something Littlefinger would have set up in his his day. But I do love the moment when you wonder, like, oh, did this poor girl like actually pass away? And then she like sits up off the table, and you're like,
Like,
oh no, something very different.
you're supposed to be dead.
Uh,
No kink shaming. Like, it's
I,
fine.
I will shame this particular king. This is kind of gross.
Um, no, but there's a moment in that scene where, like, they're sort of having fun at his expense, and he says, "Must you mock me?" And I think,
Yeah.
like, especially with Rowan, it kind of it hits her, and she's like, they're very used to seeing someone in dunk position sort of, come to these tourneys, and just like, to them it's predictable what's going to happen, and that he's not going to fare well, and but I think that's a great moment of, like, everybody's a human, everybody's living their own story, and I think it's kind of a nice reminder to her in that moment, and I like that we see compassion from her, in that moment, and then it just, like, it's so beautifully, like, flowers from that as the story goes forward to the point where, you have her, full on cheering Duncan at the trial of seven. I just love when she stands up and go on.
Which again it was her like kind of breaking the decorum of the supposed decorum of like this, what's supposed to be a very serious affair. But as we've seen, like the lords and ladies of Westeros, even though they profess to be highborn, are really kind of not living up to that promise. There are no true knights among them, and I love the moment in the tent where you mentioned that Rowan, after initially being very dismissive of Duncan, like calling him it, like, and like what he's a hedge knight. It's like a knight, but sadder. But then, as you said, the moment when he says must you mock me? I was only looking for a bit of help, and she softens, and she has the line where she recognizes, in the case of their shared humanity, that, like, even though we don't think of them in the same way, both the prostitutes and the knights are effectively selling their bodies for sport. In this context, because the knights are going out there and risking life and limb, in this violent contest that could lead to them being maimed or killed. And obviously, anytime the prostitutes are engaging in sexual activity, they're not only selling their bodies, but they're running the risk of violence as well. And so that moment when she tells him, "Be good to your body, Sir Duncan," it's likely to be the only one you're likely to get. I thought that was a wonderful moment of shared humanity between the two.
No, I agree. Though I will say, for the purpose of this stream, let's refer to them as sex workers rather than the P word.
Okay.
Just, just yeah. But yeah, I think it's yeah, I think she's a wonderful character, and I'm really glad that things, that she, you know, does what she needs to do to end up in a good position by
Yeah.
the end of the story, and I would love to see more of what lies ahead for her and Raymond. I hope we
I,
get to see them again.
I think it's going to work out. I think they're going to be happy together, and I think it's probably a good thing that Raymond doesn't know exactly how long babies take to gestate, because it's kind of left ambiguous as to whether or not she's just selling the promise that she's going to be pregnant, or if she's actually pregnant already with somebody else's baby, and now she's gonna pretend that it's Raymond. But Raymond's such, just so happy. It's like he's gonna raise that kid either way.
Yeah. But yeah, so okay. So now moving on, let's talk about uh the big family that throws things into disarray in this season of the show, as they are wont to do, the Targaryens. Um and yeah, we get the uh predominantly the characters of Sir Baelor Breakspear, heir apparent to the Iron Throne, his brother Maekar, and then the children, Baelor's son, Prince Valar, and then Maekar's children, Arion, the main antagonist, and as well as Darren and Aegon, who are missing.
Yeah.
Although anybody paying attention at least knows where one of those characters are. And yeah, and I just like I want to say right off the bat, we'll get into all the awful things that Arian does, but pretty much immediately, like, you can't help but love Baelor, as soon as he comes onto the screen. But I really want to sing the praises of Maekar as well, because that's a character who I did not have much of an impression of in the novella, but he was just so brilliantly brought to life in this, and a very three-dimensional character. And I love the early scenes of just like the sort of brotherly bickering between Baelor and Maekar. And I said fuck me, not fuck him. And it's just, yeah, it's so great. This is a different kind of Targaryen like family dynamic than we've seen. I mean, obviously Aerion lives up to awful Targaryens that we've seen in the past, but overall, especially with Baelor, we get an image of a Targaryen who's like really down to earth and sensible, and like, oh, this guy is the heir to the Iron Throne. He seems really nice and honorable, and like, it's just something that we're not super used to seeing in the context of the Targaryens, because even the good ones have like some shit going on. And and it seems like for once things have landed in a good position, as far as the throne is concerned. And of course that means something awful is going to happen. But I loved I loved these characters, particularly Baelor and Maekar. And I just I thought it was an interesting glimpse into the Targaryen dynasty at a time where their strength is waning, and they're having to do stuff like this to curry favor with the common people.
No, I mean, this is, as you said, this is a time when the Targaryens have essentially lost the thing that allowed them to conquer Westeros in the first place, and rule through fear. And so now they are having to do the much more conventional thing of trying to rule and maintain peace and order through more conventional politics. And that essentially involves, in this case, going to the tournament staged in honor of the name day of this kind of mid-level lord's daughter, and which I don't think any of them particularly want to be at, but Baelor kind of recognizes it, the utility of it, as the hand of the king and the need to maintain peace and order. And he's very formal and talking about how gracious he is to their host. Whereas Maekar has other things on his mind. He walks around, basically, the actor Sam Spruill, with one of the best displays of perpetual incredulity that I've ever seen. He just it's like he can't believe everything that's going on around him. He's just constantly taken aback for the worse. But to his credit, he is worried. It comes from a place of being worried about his sons, all of his sons who, it's one of those things that people like used to say about Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones, like, say what you will about Cersei, she loves her children. In this case, it's like, say what you will about Maekar, he's perhaps not the best father in the world, but clearly he loves his sons, all of his sons. And
I wanted to make sure I got a good. I didn't have one originally, but you just said that about his facial expression, so I went and grabbed a picture. You're right. This sums him up. He's just so done with this whole. He cannot wait to leave as soon as he gets there.
Yeah. And then by the end, he really can't wait to leave because of everything that's happened. But yeah, just like anytime he's turning his gaze or at like, something that Dunk is saying or something that Arian is saying, yeah, as you said, he like literally he would rather be anywhere else but here.
I want to say, like, here's a couple of my favorite gems from him. One is when Dunk walks in and he starts talking about, Sir Arlen and wanting to get in the list, and Maekar just turns around to his brother and he's like, "What the fuck is going on?"
Again, it's very like almost more contemporary in its approach. He's just like, who is this guy? Why are we listening to him?
And then later on, when Arian brings up the trial by 7, and he's like, "Fuck is a trial by 7?" And then Baylor goes on to explain about it. It was brought by the Andals, and he goes, "Oh well, if it was the Andals."
Yeah. He turns on Arian's like, are you hiding behind some 6,000-year-old all foolishness to avoid facing this Hedge Knight in single combat? And yeah, he just is like, I love the actor, and I do think that we get to see a slightly different side of him in the final episode when he's been humbled by what's happened, because even though they're kind of bickering a little bit throughout the show, like I think that it comes across that these two brothers, Baelor and Maekar, do really love each other. And what happens is like a tragedy that ultimately Maekar is the one who strikes the blow that ends Baelor's life in a circumstance that could have been prevented. But it comes again almost from a place of love, because even though the battle scene is shot in a very chaotic way, I actually think we see the moment where the strike happens, because there's a moment when even though Dunk is for the most part unfortunately not faring very well against Arian, there is a moment where he briefly gains the upper hand, and then we hear Maekar scream out Arian and start running towards him, and then there are two characters who kind of converge on him and try to block him, and I think one of them is Baelor, and we see Maekar break out his mace and swing and strike another knight in the helmet, and I think that's Baelor. And so we know that the moment that he struck a blow to his brother's head was a moment of when he was desperate to try to get to his son to prevent him from potentially being killed. And even though Arian is ultimately, a little shit in many respects, Baelor is Maekar is one of those characters who, like, he recognizes in a certain respect, perhaps, that he has failed as a father, which is why he's so keen to not lose Aegon, because it's this last chance to rear a son worthy of the Targaryen name. Although I think he did pretty well with Aemon, who's the one we don't see. I think Aemon turns out all right, even though perhaps he's not, they might not see a maester as a suitable career for him.
Yeah, it's all about what, as always, it comes down to what a father considers suitable for their child, and
yeah. But with Darren and Arian, like, he has, in a certain respects, failed to craft them into, upstanding, members of the Targaryen family, but they're still his sons. And one of my absolute favorite moments of acting in the entire show is the moment when Egg is approaching the sleeping, wounded Arian with a knife to potentially, kill him. And then he sees that Maekar is sitting in the chair next to Arian's bedside. And he just even though one of his sons is here to kill the other, like, he understands, he knows what's happening, and he just gets up and he puts his hands on Aegon's shoulders, and Aegon just kind of closes his eyes and leans back into his father's chest, and we see Maekar close his eyes, and it's just like, again, the love between these characters is real, as many problems as they have.
Yeah. And I will say, like, there's another moment from Maekar in the final episodes that's like where he really won me over, which was when he says something to the effect of, your Sir Arlen, did as best he could, I have no doubt. But you still have much to learn. It's considering how he was um, sort of belittling, Sir Arlen earlier in the season as some hedge knight, obviously, he was concerned about his sons, because they were missing. But just seeing him sort of respectfully, like, say to Dunk that, I respect what what your master meant to you, and it's just yeah, I thought it was a beautiful moment for the character, and he just walked away being one of my favorite characters of the season, just because of that growth and the humility that he shows in the final episode, and even like his decision to not let Ed go. Like, I completely understood, because honestly, like, somehow it works in the novella, but like in the show, it does seem like an absolutely mad idea to just let Ed go off with this hedge knight who, as established, Maekar feels still needs more training himself. And like, and that is not a safe
No.
situation for Ed to be sent into. And as a prince of the realm, like, I completely get Maekar is saying crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I completely understood that, which of course just leads into my other favorite, beat from Maekar. Where's Aegon? I don't know, my lord. I'll ask the maesters, where the fuck is he?
Which
But
definitely opens an interesting wrinkle for future seasons. Like, Ira Parker says as much. Like, it's something we'll deal with down the line. It's like, because I don't recall any like Maekar sending out like Targaryen hunting parties to find his son in the. So I think that maybe this is like a season 4 or season 5 thing.
maybe we'll weave it into the fabric of the other stories. Like, heaven forbid we have changes from the source material.
Oh, I mean, you got to be careful with that with George, because George is happy with this show right now. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, we know how short-lived that usually
yeah.
is.
We will get to how this show intersects with George R.R. Martin later, because there's also a great joke in the final. So I would just like bravo. But
Which Okay, and actually going into this next uh section, and we will, like, I know we haven't talked about, obviously, like, um with certain other of the Targaryens, but we can weave those into some of the next discussion points that I have. But I wanted to take a moment to talk about Sir Arlen
yeah.
right now, just because he's such an important part of the story, and obviously a driving force for so much of what Dunk does, and instilling Dunk's sense of honor. um Even though, like, the story, certainly there's moments where, you know Sir Arlen's memory is kind of treated with, oh, is he really that good? But I think, like, first of all, yeah, he wasn't. I think he
Mhm.
proves through the flashbacks we see that ultimately he was a good knight and he stood for honorable things. Um, Maybe not so much in some of the ways he treated Dunk at certain points, but overall, I'd say what's important is what Dunk thought of him, and he sees him as an example of what a knight should be. And I just really loved seeing those aspects of seeing, like, through more objective eyes, that yes, Sir Erlen had his faults and his flaws, but that Dunk still looked up to him so much. And even as he's about to face the trial of 7, he's literally looking up towards Sir Arlen, which, by the way, is like one of my favorite moments, just because of the expression Sir Arlen's face, where first he seems very solemn, and then he's like,
I love that moment too. Um,
and just, yeah, it's, and it's very important to Dunk, even before all the shit goes down, like, to show people, because he's so gutted that so many, of the lords and knights, like, don't remember Sir Arlen. And so he takes that upon himself to, they may not remember him, but I'm going to honor him. And, I'm going to show them what Sir Arlen's hands have wrought, uh, and I just think that's beautiful, sort of like that notion of taking in what someone meant to you. And the rest of the world might not be paying that due respect that that person deserved, but you're going to carry their memory forward and honor that. And but that's all why it's such a great moment when Baylor remembers Sir Arlen
yeah.
and gives him that respect. And you just see Dunk's face light up. And yeah, it's, and I really loved what we got with Sir Arlen in the flashback episode, um, which is also the big, the actual trial episode. But I just thought that was great, because the show before that kind of enjoys taking, taking the piss where Sir Arlen is concerned. But then we see exactly why Dunk admired him so much. The fact that he literally saved his life, that he comes, you know, drunk out of the tavern, swinging his sword, saying, "Leave that boy be," and even in that state, protects Dunk, and then proceeds to just take right. But and then we get all the bits with him, drunkenly, singing. I think it's Dothraki. Somebody told me, um, and like, and I do want to pay respect to Danny Webb, the actor, who played Sir Arlen. Just did such an amazing job of being this this completely wily, out there old guy, but you can see, where he instilled so many things in Dunk, and why Dunk loved and admired him so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, Sir Arwen is a very, he's a very flawed character, but he has many virtues and many good qualities. Not the least of which we have to acknowledge it, is Sir Arwen of Pennytree's Penny Tree, shall we say? Emphasis on the word tree, because at the start of episode 2, yeah, they go a little bit overboard with the size of Sir Arwen's manhood, but as Ira Parker said in the after show commentary, it's because they're going to spend the rest of the episode taking a shit on him, so they wanted to give him something, and it makes sense that a man like that would be walking through life in a more serene fashion, because he knows he's got it.
I mean,
But
it makes it tough to ride on the horse, is my question.
oh yeah, no, I mean, I think like he would actually fare pretty well in a measuring contest with the horse in this respect. But I think that, as you said, ultimately, even though yes, Sir Arwen drinks and sleeps with sex workers, and ultimately is he strikes Dunk several times and had never won a tourney. he ultimately instilled in Dunk the virtues of what it truly is to be a knight. And I love there's a moment again in the after episode for episode 6, I believe it is, where Ira Parker talks about the fact that Sir Arwen definitely was good enough to have served a lord or a knight and joined their household and perhaps gone on to greater renown. But by the end of the season, I should say, Dunk comes to understand why Sir Arwen chose to live as he did, because, he may have not been the man that he was, capable of raising Dunk in that way, if he had decided to attach himself to a greater house and become part of their internal politics. He chose to live in his own way, and as a hedge knight, and in that way managed to kind of stay free of some of the more corrupting influences that come with the social politics of Westeros. And I think that the show really kind of honors his memory through that, as Dunk says, I am his legacy. And slight spoiler alert for anyone who's seen the original show, like Sir Duncan the Tall grows up to become perhaps the greatest knight in Westerosi history. And the fact that this man, this hedge knight, is the one who trained him and gave him this chance, this poor boy from Flea Bottom who essentially followed him on the road because he had shown him kindness and he had nowhere else to turn. I think that really also speaks to the kind of the morality of what this show is trying to convey, and why now Egg will become, in many respects, Dunk's legacy as he teaches him to live as Sir Arwen taught him. And it must be said that final moment of the final episode, that beautiful shot of the two Dunk and Egg on the road with essentially the spirit of Sir Arwen riding beside them and then turning off into the field, it gets the tears up a little bit.
That hit me really hard.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. And speaking of the honor that Dunk is instilled with, from his life spent with Sir Arlen, which then brings us to when the moment to, you know, act on that sense of honor, really presents itself, and that is when the dipshit known as Aryan Brightflame, you know, um, attacks Tanzil and gets the whole ball rolling. And as I mentioned before, I think it really says a lot that there's no hesitation whatsoever. Ed comes running and saying, and Arian's hurting her, and he goes in um, and it's just like you consider his instant action in that moment played against, Arian's, just like, pompous, shrugging of, why did you throw your life away for her? Was that really worth it? And it's just like, you just want to beat the shit out of him. And then just an absolute great moment when Ed comes running in and reveals himself. And of course, the classic line for those of us who know the novella and of you little wretch, what on earth did you do to your hair? I didn't want to look like you, brother. And the music, like we haven't like sung the praises of the music yet by Dan Romer, but like the very operatic music in this episode that plays predominantly with the scenes with Arian, and then comes in like, and with the quick cutting of the reaction shots from everybody when Egg's identity is revealed. It's really in wonderful contrast to like everything else we've gotten with the show thus far, which is a very sort of laid back, almost Western vibe. And this is like sort of it's not the moment where we get the Game of Thrones theme, but it's the moment where I think the music kind of signals that the show is shifting gears, and we're now getting into the like the more familiar like heavy politics and and dire situations that we're familiar with Westeros. And I just think it's an absolutely brilliant moment. And yeah, like we don't like Arian as soon as he enters the show, but like this is the moment where we're like, even though we ultimately don't get our wish, at least here, uh, we're kind of like, all right, you need to die as painfully as possible.
Yeah. No, and definitely our classic, Targaryen, wrong side of the coin villain in this show. And anyone who had seen the original show, they spoil his ultimate fate there. Doesn't have a good end. Aryan Bright Flame thinking he's a dragon, drinking wildfire. You can believe it
Yeah,
when that comes. But I think that what Finn Bennett, the actor, does in this particular iteration of the character is he shows that, like, I don't really even think that, even though Arian is clearly like savage and cruel and unhinged, there is kind of a method to his madness in this show, because he essentially, even though he's committing these cruel and unspeakable acts, he's doing it because this is the way he perceives in the world he needs to assert his power. Um, the Targaryens came to the Ashford Meadow to, on this essentially diplomatic mission, and Baelor has a very, different idea about what that entails in the more traditional sense. Arian is kind of seeing it almost as an opportunity to remind the small folk of Westeros, no, you need to fear us. We are still the Targaryens. We are still the blood of the dragon, and not having a dragon to make that point, he is resorting to much more, visceral and brutal acts, like the terrible moment when, in the joust against Sir Humphrey Harding, he goes for his horse's neck and impales it and kills it and breaks, Sir Harding's leg. And it's clear, as Raymond says, he did that on purpose, because not just to be a dick, but because he wants to show, like, do not mess with me. Do not mess with the blood of the dragon. And it's the same reason why he attacks Tanzel, for the crime, such as it is, of daring to show a fictional depiction of a knight slaying a dragon. Arian, thinking of himself as a literal dragon in that sense, is like, oh, I think this is a personal attack on me and my family, and so I am entitled to essentially destroy, like, to break your finger, to humiliate you. And he seems almost as you said, he seems almost taken aback when Dunk Dare stands up to him, like, not even so much that he was struck, but the idea that Dunk would, act so honorably on behalf of this nothing to him. This woman is nothing to him. And he all throughout these encounters is essentially, operating again. And even his decision to call for a trial of 7 is basically him invoking the power that he has, because he wants to seem bigger than he is. And ultimately, we do see that he is a very capable fighter. He is smaller and less strong than Dunk, but he is quick. He is well trained. And unfortunately, it must be said, and up until the very end of the battle, he is, very much kicking Dunk's ass. He is like brute. Dunk takes a lot of wounds that would have killed a lesser man. At that moment, in particular, like when Arian is striking him with the mace and driving his spear or his knife into Dunk's visor, and then flinging his sword and impaling Dunk in the leg. It's
by the way, that is like, I don't want to like go on too much about it yet, because we're gonna get there shortly. But like the choreography of the
yeah,
trial of 7, especially all the stuff between those two, like, oh my god, chef's kiss.
yeah.
But the thing about like Arian is, like, it's maddening because he's very clearly extremely well read. He knows the histories of Westeros and of the Targaryen legacy, and that's part of why he's so intent on, like, maintaining that respect, but like his view on how to go about it, which of course perfectly matches with his like sociopathic tendencies. um it's in direct opposition to what Baylor needs they actually need to do, which is not exert their dominance through violence and force, but to appease the common people and like and extend their hand. And that's why they're at the tourney. They do stuff like this because they don't have the dragons anymore, so they can't rely just on brute force. um because the people are no longer have the dragons to be afraid of. And so you just look at Baylor just shaking his head as Arian does what he does in the joust. And then when the people get outraged and the King's Guard have to come out to protect Arian, and it's just like, that is not what they're there to do. It's the complete opposite of what they're there to do. And so yeah, it's extremely frustrating for Baylor. But Arian is very concerned with making the Targaryens still be like feared and respected in that way. And then when what happens with Sir Duncan happens, it's like not in like, yes, part of it is like that, like he is a chicken shit. He doesn't want to face Duncan on his own because as skilled as he is, Dunk is still freaking huge and very strong. Uh, but also it's that inflated ego of, we need to make a spectacle out of this. And so yeah, and which just makes it great when at the very end of the fight, and when you see him yield, and then like you see that he is a chicken shit. Just like at the end of the day, he's just he's a scared little boy. And it's extremely gratifying seeing him being dragged long by Dunk. But yeah, like extremely fascinating character, and Finn Bennett like just plays the hell out of it. But he's an absolute like piece of shit character, without a doubt.
And he is, as so many piece of shit characters seem to be, they are played by like very empathetic, good-hearted people. Because one of the great joys of the behind-the-scenes stuff is you see Peter Coyfey and Finn Bennett like hanging out together, and it's clear that these two are just having a great time together. But yeah, Finn. Arian's fate is, I don't think that his time in the Free Cities is going to fix him. If anything, it was not the right idea maker. It's not gonna work out. But yeah, I really think that he is, he's a very effective. Oh, go ahead.
I didn't really get why that would fix him. Like giving him independence far away from parental supervision actually is going to have the exact opposite effect. I see him getting worse, not better.
I think so. Yeah, no, because yeah, this is definitely, it's a really important moment when Darren, comes to to Dunk and says, he wasn't always a little monster, meaning Arian. He was once quite the glad child. He liked fishing, and it's clear that something, you know, people seem to think that like it's destiny in terms of Targaryens. When the Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin. But as we saw in the original series, it's not actually always the case. Sometimes it is the circumstances that can drive the people the mad. And while Arian ultimately bears responsibility for his own actions, I do think in many respects he is also, in a certain element, a tragic figure, because he didn't have to be this way. He ultimately chose to be this way.
It's one of those things where like, yeah, like getting away from his circumstances actually might have done him a lot of good when he was younger.
Yeah.
um but I think at this point it's just going to solidify his less than great, you know, aspects of his personality. So yeah, I, which is why it's a good thing to get Edge away, you know, while he is still young and like and good natured, even as that darkness is starting to creep in. But yeah, let's talk about like we've talked about bits and pieces of it, but like I want to talk about the actual like, but a little bit of the battle too, but predominantly like the build up to the trial of seven. Um, y- all that stuff with like Baylor, talking to Duncan, how good a knight are you? Um, and then sort of Dunk, sort of in hopeless despair. And this is where we're actually also going to talk about Steely Pate because oh my god, what a great character! But Um, we talked about Stefan earlier and like how you know, he does the shitty thing, which is tells Sir Duncan that he's going to, uh, gather, gather fellow fighters, from his friends, which he does not do. And Edge is really the one who delivers on that front. And we get a great roster you know, of knights. We didn't really mention oh god, what's his name is Sir Robin Riesling, the one-eyed knight of House Riesling, who like that this is another guy that I want to see again because he just seems like just sort of a bit of a mad lunatic in the best possible way. um I yeah, you can see him right there. And yeah, I just you know love all this. And then of course the big climax with I mean, I feel like we should talk about the other stuff before we actually get to the big moment that happens right before the trial starts. Um but yeah, just for me, this was just such a great episode because it was all this sort of tension building and character interaction and this questioning of like, who is actually honorable and who's going to rise to the occasion. And and again, like I think this episode kind of solidified what this show is, um, which is basically that honor is not a thing to be smirked at or or as the case may be, farted at. But yeah, it's. I just really loved seeing the people who did rally behind Dunk, and it's a moment that ends with that. I feel like we don't very often get where it just feels like there are actually people rallying to the cause of an honorable man and on the side of good. And for me, that's the key of what's so great about this story.
Well, I agree. I think in the post episode, this episode called Seven is my favorite episode of this first season. I think it's exceptional. And in the post episode commentary, Ira Parker talks about the fact that it's kind of very intentional that on one side, the Targaryens, most of the Targaryen side, it's essentially the privilege and wealth and power of the realm and the opportunists like Sir Stephen. And on the other side, it's the knights who have kind of made their own way, with one of the exception, obviously, of Baelor, and kind of risen up among their circumstances. Like you mentioned, Sir Robin Riesling, that moment when he comes across Egg training Thunder, like he's a very like menacing character. And so I remember actually being very surprised when he shows up and he's one of the knights in fighting for Sir Duncan. But then it makes sense because he ultimately is a knight who believes essentially in the power of the warrior, like the warrior charging them to be brave in these circumstances. And yes, I think he enjoys the circumstances of the battle, but he's ultimately still there for the right reasons. We don't get as much about Sir Humphrey Harding is obviously in it for revenge against Arion, who broke his leg and killed his horse. We don't get as much about Beesbury, but obviously Raymond is very loyal to Dunk, and Lionel, like, even though he is kind of a good time boy in a lot of respects, he is he seems to be honestly like very glad to be there as well.
I
And
always knew
so
you meant trouble.
yeah, I always knew you meant trouble. Yeah, that was wonderful. And then obviously, the moment when Dunk is kind of calling out the Lords of Westeros, and we see that what a dick the Brackens always seem to be.
What makes that moment like so enraging is just because, like, and I was slightly confused for a second because I'm like, wait a second, are they changing things up? Because it's Baylor who done, but it's a very like powerful,
Yeah.
like hell yeah moment when that guy stands up and that's like, no, you're just being an ass.
Yeah.
And,
Quite
yeah.
literally, like it's the moment, the lowest moment of the low, and it's the moment that it really kind of shatters Dunk, whatever faith Dunk had in like the traditions and nobility of knighthood and lordship in Westeros. And then that moment, at his darkest, he gets the essentially a reignition of hope when Baelor, the king's heir, the hand of the king, rides out in his son's armor and takes it off and yells, "I will take Sir Duncan's side," and we get the traditional Game of Thrones theme, which I love. The director Sarah Adina Smith, like in the after episode stuff, is talking about. Even as she was shooting it, she was like humming under her breath, dun 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 dun. I'm like, yes, woman after my own heart here. And yes, it's like there is. I'm not the first person to make this analogy, because in every respect, this is so incredibly evocative of. And I know that they were written, not necessarily in this way, but this is so evocative of Oberyn, in his moment with Tyrion of the "I will be your champion." And I do remember, like, even though there was like, hell yes, this is iconic, one of the best moments in all of Game of Thrones and across the three shows. But then we had an entire week of people just being like, "Oh my God, Baelor Targaryen is the greatest. He's so great. I love him. He is the best Targaryen ever." And I was just like, sweet summer children, you know how this ends.
It's like, come on, just like I know you're having the wool pulled over your eyes because it's a more like lighthearted show in many respects, but like, come on, you've seen this play out in other forms. Like, at least a little caution, please. Um, yeah, and then it toys with us by like, the end of episode 5, like, did anyone die? And and they list off the people who did die, and like, and Baylor's not among them, and Baylor walks up and starts talking with Sir Duncan. So you're like, okay, everything's fine. We can relax. It's good. And then that absolutely horrific moment of, when they remove his helmet, and yeah, and there's a big chunk of the back of his head missing. And oh god. And it's like, yep, this is Game of Thrones.
Yes, indeed. And it is the moment that reminds us that there is still a cost sometimes to doing the honorable thing, because even though Lionel takes him to task for it later and saying like, "Oh, he risked nothing by going up against men who were sworn to defend him," like, clearly he did risk something, because he essentially, his duty to the realm would essentially dictate that he should not have put himself at risk. He is the heir to the Iron Throne. He is the hand of the king.
Sure, if the King's Guard are going to take it easy or not, you put yourself in that situation. It's a risk. It's the only point in the show where I'm like, not cool, Lionel, not cool.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. I agree.
but it's fine because like I know where he's coming from. I said this over on Costume Co's channel. I said it's and it was the same day I'd used the same GIF in the Slack Actually, where I said it reminded me of the Big Lebowski with "You're not wrong, Walter. You're just an asshole," and that sums up my feelings about Lionel in that scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And because Baylor ultimately, like, he in this moment is choosing almost to be a knight in the truest sense instead of a lord, instead of a future king, to live up to the values of chivalry. Like one of the, as great as the "I will take Sir Duncan's side" moment is, I think it's his next line when it is even more powerful, when Maker's like, "Are you mad? This man attacked my son," and he says, this man defended the innocent, as every true knight must. Let the gods decide if he was right or wrong. And obviously he is right in what he did, and Baylor is right to want to stand with him. Again, as almost, even if you taking aside just like almost the personal morality of it, like, again, this is why he came to Ashford in the first place, politically. Like, the Targaryens essentially came here on a peace mission, and now we have all of the Targaryens and their Kingsguard lined up against this poor Hedge Knight who is more representative of the people, and they're about to pass judgment on him and kill him. And Baylor essentially takes this moment to say, no, we as the crown can still stand for, justice and the knightly virtues, and he's trying to embody that. It just so happens that, the beautiful tragic detail of the fact that he didn't bring his armor to Ashford because he wasn't expecting to fight, so he rides into battle wearing his son's armor. And we'll get to it, but he doesn't get much in the show, but that absolutely heartbreaking moment from Balar Targaryen, Baelor's son, where he says, he died in my armor. Countless sons have died in their father's armor. How many fathers have died in their sons? And the idea of like that he would have been a great king. Like, I think they play it up a little bit, but the idea that Baelor had the potential to truly be a great king, the greatest sense, whatever Jaehaerys the First, or whatever good Targaryen king you want to name. But he again, instead is struck down and died, in this meadow, because he chose in that moment to stand up for what was right. And would it have been a kindness for him to, stay out of this and perhaps give the realm a kinder, ruler down the line? Because obviously circumstances, arise later that would, because as good as Aegon goes on to be later as king, frankly, the Mad King ultimately is Aegon's grandson. So we know that circumstance. But also, like, there's the beautiful moment when Dunk is talking to Maekar in the finale, and he talks about the fact that, like, if I had not fought, you would have had my hand and my foot. And I'm lying there under the tree wondering if I could have spared one so that Baelor might live. And Maker's like, well, then what do you tell yourself? And he says, well, I think, Sir Arwen often would say, I wonder what the morrow will bring. And I can't help but wonder if one day there will be a time when I will have need of that foot, even more than the realm had need of Prince Baelor. And Maker's like, not bloody likely. But of course, in its own way, that is the truth. Why did the gods take Baelor and leave Dunk? It is because, in his own way, Dunk will go on to do every bit as much good as Baelor would have had he lived.
Yeah, we have Maekar saying not bloody likely, and then on the other hand, we have that bit from Game of Thrones, 4 pages for Sir Duncan.
Yeah.
He must have been quite a man, so they say.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a big part of like why I'm like I really hope that this show gets to go as far as it wants to go. Because you know we can get into contentious waters if we start having a conversation about whether those novellas will actually be written. They wouldn't. But but I want to see like this story play out, and get to see the obviously there's a lot of discussions to be had about what will be the sort of practicalities of like how far to go, because presumably like if we go all the way they'd probably have to like recast Egg at some point. Heck, maybe even I mean, maybe not Duncan. They could probably age him up because he's 29. He's not, they've aged up more than that. Um, but I don't really care about any of that right now. But that's just a sort of like wishful thinking of the future. But bottom line is, I would really love to see this story go on, and get to see exactly how big of an impact uh, Dunk gets to have, on the realm, and to see that relationship between him and Aegon, really flourish. And I think that would be an amazing story to see and experience.
For that than I did originally because I was wondering if, given the fact we only have the 3 Dunk and Egg novellas, if George R.R. Martin was going to be amenable to allowing yet another series to go past his written work. But then Ira Parker came out and basically says that George has given him some of the ideas that he has for future potential books and seasons. And I'm like, that's an encouraging development. Maybe that George is, recognizing that like we should, these stories need to be told in some way. And I will say that I have, I have slightly more faith that we could see a new Dunk and Egg novella than we will ever see Winds of Winter, because on that front, I think it's 0, whereas in this, it's maybe 1%. But
Just the thing that, and we can talk about this because it's further into the stream, and maybe it won't pop up on as many people's radars, but like it is sort of funny like to be going through this again with George has told me about the stories, he's given me outlines. And I know that there's a lot of people like really getting upset about that idea. Meanwhile, you and I are just sitting here like, no, that's great, bring it on.
I'd be happy, and I will say that right now it seems like Ira Parker and George R.R. Martin have a great relationship, very productive, very respectful of one another. But the moment in the finale, and, when they give Sir Arwen the line, "A true knight always finishes a story," I was like, "Well played, Ira. Well played."
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little bit disappointing that like George may have even like known about that line, and maybe even likes it because he has a sense of humor. But still, I'm gonna pretend like it was a dig, even though I'm sure it wasn't.
Yeah.
At least not on the front, at least not officially. But no, I did get a chuckle out of that. That was a lot of fun. Um, I don't want to breeze past because obviously it's very important. It's very easy to like focus on the Baylor of it all in that moment. But what precedes that is just such an extraordinarily powerful bit of acting from Peter Claffey,
Yeah.
As Duncan, and just where he's just at he's just at the his wit's end of like he's trying to hold on to this belief in the honor of the knights of Westeros and the lords, and he's lost it at this point. And and when he cries out, you know has honor deserted the noble houses of Westeros? I will not believe it is so. Are there no true knights among you? It's so powerful. Um, and like, this is like his big moment in the season. Um, and he exemplifies all that is best in knighthood. And, it's very easy to be reminded of, like, someone who followed the later on down the line in the Sir Brienne of Tarth.
Yes. Which again, I love the fact that even though it has never been, directly canonically confirmed, it has been heavily implied by as much as George R.R. Martin himself that there is a descendant of Sir Duncan the Tall present in the original A Song of Ice and Fire story. And if you connect the dots, it's pretty clear that person is meant to be Brienne. And yeah, because the original show did reckon with the ideas of what it means to be a true knight, and Brienne representing the truest knight in many respects, and the journey she goes on with Jaime, like helping to change him for the better in many respects. And Sir Dunk, in just the course of this short story, has already started to change a number of characters for the better. And I don't think it can be overstated the fact that there's this big moment where he's giving this big speech, not only in front of the noble houses of Westeros and calling him out on it, but in front of the common people, of who have come to watch the tourney. And many of them, who didn't have any idea who he was and just came for the sport of it, it connects with them, because by the end, they are cheering for him. They are cheering for Sir Duncan the Tall and against the Targaryens. And this is really where his legend begins. And as you said, it's such a great moment of acting from Peter Claffey, because he's been kind of a more reserved, understated character throughout most of the show. And this is the moment he really gets to let loose. And it's powerful. You really see this is a man who lives up to the legend that he will become.
And this is really the moment where I want to, sort of talk about this story as a coming of age story, because it really resonates just watching him come into his own in this moment. And this guy who's sort of, he's never been comfortable in his life. He's faced a lot of hardships, but he has always sort of, you know, had someone looking out for him. First with Rafe, and then with Sir Arlen, and um, and then with Ed, it's a different dynamic. Right now things are sort of up in the air about what their relationship is going to be, but by the end of the final episode, it's clear that that Dunk is going to be looking after him, but he has to stand on his own 2 feet in this moment, and it's just Dunk becoming both a knight, and I think growing into the man that he's going to be. And yeah, it just really hit hard with me. And it's just so great to see him, gather up that strength. It was, because he plays someone who's a lot of the time is very timid, and just to, see that in this moment he's not, especially when he's sort of, ridiculed in this moment, when he first tries to appeal to them, to not back down, to not sort of slink away and say, well, that didn't work, I guess I'm screwed. The fact that no, he's going to make these people hear him. And I think it's an absolutely extraordinary moment, and obviously one of the best of the season, and I think probably a Peter Claffey's strongest moment, a work across the season.
Yeah, and I think that it's all the more powerful because, of what the actor himself, has described. He had terrible, nervous anxiety getting ready to shoot this scene because it was such a big responsibility, and he's not the most experienced actor. And he has a humorous anecdote in the behind the scenes reel where he talks about on the day they were supposed to shoot this, he comes into the production office, he's just vomiting everywhere, and Ira Parker's like, just like Dunk. And we see him, vomit right before. But I think it's actually essential that we see that side of Dunk because he's clearly terrified. He's fighting for his life. He's racked by insecurity, by this sense of imposter syndrome. What is he even doing here? Would he have been better off to not come here at all? But in classic things loop back around circular fashion for Game of Thrones. What's one of the most famous and beloved quotes in the entire series? Can a man be brave when he's afraid? That is the only time a man can be brave. And one of the other things that I love absolutely about this moment in retrospect is that in the finale, the show does something very interesting that I wasn't really expecting, which it casts doubt on the idea, did Sir Arwen ever actually knight Dunk? Is he actually, a true knight here? Like, is he actually just pretending at being a knight? But of course, what the show is saying is that no, absolutely not. Because even if Sir Arwen didn't say the words, Dunk is living up to the values of what it means to be a knight in this scene, and so he is. So he is a true knight.
I'm going to say something contentious, which is that I know a lot of people lean towards, he wasn't actually knighted, but it doesn't matter because, he lives up to that. I'm going to say something contrary to that. No, in the way that we sort of view Dunk and what he stands for, is he any less of a knight in our eyes? Because if he didn't actually, if Sir Arwen didn't actually knight him and take the oath, then no. But I think it would matter a great deal to Dunk. And based on what we know of his character, I believe that Sir Arwen does knight him in the end, because I think I don't see Dunk as the kind of person who would lie about that. But the show very intentionally leaves it up to the viewer, and it's ambiguous. But my feeling on it is that, my personal belief, and I will stick with that, and unless the show says otherwise, I don't think it will. I think the story will continue to leave it ambiguous, but I do believe that Sir Arlen knighted Duncan under that tree just before he died. Because I don't see Dunk claiming that he was knighted when he wasn't.
I mean, that I respect that interpretation. I will just say that for my interpretation, I didn't want to do this, but I actually do lean more on the other side, because there's also the moment where Dunk is Stefan has betrayed them, and Sir Raymond kneels in front of Dunk and is asking him to knight him, and asks him again, and Dunk is stalling and stalling, and I think it's meant to kind of imply that he doesn't know the words that you need to say to knight somebody.
I understand that interpretation, and I think it's a very compelling interpretation of that moment. I also see it as, I don't think Dunk completely knows that he wants to put Raymond in that situation.
Which again is also fair.
I think that if he knights, because he knows if he knights Raymond, then that's going to place his life in jeopardy, and so, like I said, I think the way it's played is very much open to interpretation. So nobody's wrong here. It can absolutely be read either way. But yeah, that's my read on it, and I know a lot of people go the other way on it. But that's what I love about ambiguity in stories.
No, I do too, and
yeah.
And I was going to say, I actually, even though I just always assumed, yes, he was knighted, and then the show kind of cast doubt on it. Now that the show has introduced this ambiguity, I hope it's a mystery that is never definitively answered. I prefer the ambiguity.
The ambiguity is there in the novella too.
Yeah.
I don't know how, like, we don't get like a flashback scene of making us think that, oh, he didn't knight him. Oh, just kidding. Sir Erland's actually still like that. That's not in the novella, but it's never like, but it is played kind of, because we get the same thing in the novella about his hesitance about knighting Raymond, and sort of other little moments like that. Um, so yeah, I was just, when that scene started, I was like, oh shit, are they gonna answer it? Are they like gonna make it not ambiguous? And and then when Sir Arlen wakes back up, I was like, oh, you fuckers. But I'm glad ultimately they did it that way. Um, okay, so we kind of talked already about um we are running light past, you know, I'm trying to make these streams shorter. Um I like I don't want to sort of belabor it too long, but I do feel we should address the flashback of episode 5, which is a very important part of the show. We've talked about the Sir Arlen of it all, but I also want to make sure we uh, pay due to the story of Rafe and Dunk. Just because, for one thing, it's so fucking tragic, and I just think the actors do such wonderful work. And as a matter of fact, Chloe Lee, who plays Rafe, is actually also in Dune Prophecy.
Yeah.
Have you watched that show yet, Jared? I wasn't sure if you. I don't know.
Not,
Yeah,
not yet.
I didn't recognize her initially because she seems so much smaller in this, which Dunk is supposed to be big. So maybe that's why. Um, but no, I thought she did a wonderful job, and then you know, and then you got the asshole, you know, um, City Watch, you know, the guy Alistair, you know, who I'm glad he meets a really bad end at Sir Arlen's hands. But I think what was important about this is to really show us Dunk's life in Flea Bottom, you know, when he was young, and sort of, for one thing, to show why, like, Sir Arlen, you know, why he latched on to Sir Arlen the way he did, but also just to show that, you know, that the life that he's led, so that when we get to that, you know, that showdown between him and Arian, and that, like, at the end of the day, this is Dunk of Flea Bottom, you know, fighting for his life, and for everybody that he's lost along the way. And I feel like when he is slugging Arian at the end there, it's not only about like all the horrible things that, like, that Arian did to Tanzel, but it's also like it's Alistair, you know, murdering Rafe, and like it's just the loss of his mother, and I think it's, and the loss of Sir Arlen. I think he's like, this is a man who has suffered so much, and I think he's like, this is him, you know, sort of letting go of his rage into, you know, this symbol of all the things in this world that are wicked, and things that he stands against. And so I think it's like a very important part of that episode. And you know, a lot of people said, oh, why can't we just get to the fight? And I'm like, yeah, but the the actual trial by 7 like does not have the gravity that it has unless you have the first half of that episode. And I just thought it was beautifully executed, and just made me really sad, because, you know, I hate it when, you know, tragic things happen to good people. And But yeah, it's I love this, and also because I like that we're plunging into the battle, and like when I was younger, give me like all the big battle scenes in the world, like the more fight scenes and epic war scenes and all this stuff, like the better. But I have found as I've started to get a little older, like it is those character moments that really grab me. And so to sort of ground this episode in Dunk's journey and his the tragedy of his life and all the hardships that he's faced, I think it just made it immensely more satisfying once we actually got to the brawl.
No, it was a very clear, deliberate, stylistic choice, as Ira Parker says, to ground this episode in Dunk's point of view as much as possible. And yes, that includes, as you said, like going back and flashing back to the circumstances in his life that have led him to this moment. His bond with Rafe, his very close childhood friend with real love between them, and then the tragic, horrible, needless way in which she's taken from him. And like his kind of grief over that loss, and the kind of the how lost he feels until he finds Sir Arlen, and Sir Arlen tells him get up, which is echoed throughout by Aegon calling for him to get up. And then also like the parallels between Rafe, an innocent who was cut down by this horrible city watchman, Sir Alistair, and Tanzel, another character who Dunk was, had like love for, and the cruel way she was treated by Arian. And it's a direct parallel that like one of these guys was just a miserable asshole city watchman, and the other is a prince of the realm. But at the end of the day, they're both just bullies. And Dunk of Flea Bottom is not gonna stand for like he's going to stand up for what was right in the way he couldn't when he was younger and Rafe's throat was cut in front of him. I'm glad you shouted out the actress who plays Rafe, Chloe Lee, because I thought she did a wonderful job in a very brief role. But I also just love the fact that, again, even as you said, there was a version of this episode that they could have done that was just taking a wider view of the entire battle and focusing on all the different characters and all the different moments that were going on. But that's not the way that Ira Parker wanted to shoot it. And even though like the original Game of Thrones series went on to have some sort of spectacular battles, episodes that I love, like I will defend the Long Night to my last breath, and the Spoils of War, and the Watchers on the Wall, and the Bells and everything. But like one of the things I love so much about all those episodes is that even though they're operating on a bigger scale, they are always character focused. In Watchers in Blackwater, we're following Tyrion, and it's mostly through his perspective. In Watchers on the Wall, we're following Jon, and it's mostly through his perspective. In Battle of the Bastards, again, it's mostly Jon's perspective. In the Spoils of War, it's mostly Jaime's perspective, and then in the Long Night, it's Arya and Jon and Dany, and so on and so on. And in this case, it's a similar idea. Like it's Dunk's perspective, and they're just making it a little bit more literal and like giving us literal POV shots of Dunk, through his helmet, through this incredibly narrow slit of like just emphasizing again, like just how hard it is to actually fight in this medieval style armor, and and how incredibly dangerous it is. Like, Dunk does become almost like superhuman in a sense, because like he takes so many wounds in this battle that any one of them could have killed him. Arian spears him with the javelin. He strikes him with the mace several times. He again, drives his dagger through Dunk's eye. He impales his leg. Like, no one, like there are two moments when Dunk is essentially like down and out for the count, and you very easily could believe that, yeah, this is it for him. But it's again the resilient, not only his immense physical strength, but the resilience that he cultivated growing up in Flea Bottom, and the love and the honor that was instilled in him by Sir Arwen, echoed by the faith that Egg is showing for him, that makes him get up. And that moment when he like rises up, and even though his eye is swollen shut and he's bleeding from 7 different wounds and he is, can barely stand, but he picks up the sword and moves toward Arion. And there's that great moment when Arion, who had just thought he was won, like you see his shoulders slump and he's like, I can't believe it. I'm gonna have to. And in that moment, that Dunk is finally going to win.
I will say it's another one of my favorite bits of performance from him when he thinks that Dunk is dead and he's like, he's dead. It's over. No, yeah, and there is an interpretation that Dunk actually dies in that moment, and that with the episode being called "In the Name of the Mother," and obviously there's so many, allusions to the mother, throughout the episode, and that the mother actually brings him back to life in that moment. And it wasn't something that I initially considered watching the episode, but after I heard it brought up, I was like, I'm willing to entertain that. It's I had especially because he does seem very like out of it in that moment. And if I didn't know better, I'd say yes, he looks like he's dead. But just that moment when he is jerked back, away, and it's like, it's Egg not giving up on him, and you know, get up, Sir Duncan, get up. And then when he sees just Dunk's like eyes twitch, the way he screams out, it's just, yeah, oh my god. Dexter's, what an amazing performance. Like, I feel like we haven't spent as much time talking about Edge as we have Dunk, but like, man, can that kid act. And and this is like one of his big moments, and yeah, I just love him so much, and that was a big moment. And but yeah, I don't know. I don't have that much more to say about the actual fight. I said before, like, the choreography was out of its world and incredible, um, and just the way, like, I think this is like, we've never quite seen jousting in a Game of Thrones show like this. Obviously the choreography for this scene is amazing, but also if you go back to the earlier episodes where we get that jousting scene at night, I thought that was incredible. Just the way the camera, like, it followed the jousters, and then we got that one shot of like the guy leaning off the side of his horse and like picking up his shield or something or whatever it was. And I just thought, holy shit, like, I'm used to like the jousting scenes from A Knight's Tale, but they did some pretty damn cool stuff here too. So yeah, I was really impressed.
I was too, because we had seen jousting briefly in the original Game of Thrones show with the tournament from, the Hands tournament in season 1, but of course that was back when the show didn't have quite as much of a budget as it did, so it was a less grand affair. Obviously they go on to do spectacular things with the budgets in the later seasons. Like, I'll always think of the moment where like the Dothraki are jumping up from their saddles onto horseback and literally standing on their horses as they're shooting arrows, which was incredible. But this is like, it's also an incredible feat of choreography. And it kind of reinforces, like, if in case you needed it, just what an utterly insane exercise jousting is. And it's like, why would anyone ever want to do this? It's terrifying in that way. And then getting down into the mud with all the different battles and all these medieval weapons, like the Morning Star ball and chain that Arion's wielding. Like, it's, we remember how vicious these weapons of war are. And the costuming, like, Arion's armor is just so cool. And even though and Baylor's armor as well, and Dunk's armor. Like I love the fact that Steely Pate had talked about, like, I don't make any of these helmets with like these fancy like winged bullshit, but mine will keep you safe. And it's like, he was right.
Which actually brings us to I want to hurry towards the finish line and wrap this up. But two things, because we didn't actually talk about Steely Pate. I want to talk about how much I love that man. He is just amazing. Just again, one of these characters who, like, Dunk meets him. He's like, how much will it cost? And he gives him the price, and Dunk's like, well, I can't afford that, and and he's like, all right, and he starts to walk away. And Steely Pate, another one of these characters who, like, with this heavy sigh of, oh, like, he recognizes something Dunk where he wants to help him out, and he's like, wait. And so, like, and he gives him, like, he's fair with him. Like, he does so much more than he has to in that situation, where, like, he takes the little tiny bit of money that Dunk has and says, I'll give you a day of work, and like, and yeah, he'll, like, if Dunk doesn't come back with the rest of the money, he'll sell the work to somebody else. But still, that's adding to his workload that he doesn't need to be doing, and with no guarantee or even a reason at all to expect that Dunk is going to come back with the rest of the money. Like, that was really great for him to do. And then, of course, the big moment later when he has Dunk's shield, and and Dunk says, how much do I owe you for all this? And Steely Pate just sort of leans back, strokes his beard, is like, for you, the copper. Yeah, it just, oh my God, such a great moment. And, like, yeah, he's again, like, we don't have that much time because I want us to wrap up, but, like, I'd say this about so many people on the show, but he is, like, one of my favorite characters of the season.
Yeah, no, shout out to the actor Yusef Kirkor, who does a great moment. I also love the moment immediately preceding that copper moment where Dunk is he's seen the painting that Tanzel has done on his shield, and he's despairing. Like, the red is the color of blood, and the star, and it's the setting sun, and the star is falling, and it's almost like this shield represents death. And Steely Pate looks at him and says, "The tree's alive, man." And and indeed it is.
Yeah, and I just love how, like, he's there through to the end with Dunk of just, like, being there to help out, like, at the actual trial. And yeah, and he's the one who helps get Baylor's helmet off, and and the look on his face says it all. But yeah. Okay, now going into, we've talked a fair bit about the final episode. I'll just, like, but if there's any highlights that we didn't kind of cover, I'll let you sort of bring them up if you'd like, and then we'll just talk a little bit about Dunk and Egg's bond in this final episode as they head off together. But were there any moments that you especially wanted to touch on from the last episode?
There one that I kind of referenced earlier, but it also kind of ties back to an earlier moment, because even though we mentioned the actor and the character briefly, one of the actors who I had kind of not really been on my radar for the first half of the show, but then became, like, again, one of my favorite performers in the show is Henry Ashton, who plays Darren. The great moment when we see him in the first episode where he is just stinking drunk and looking very non-impressive, and he points at Dunk. He's like, "I dreamed of you," and then he's just out of it. But then that beautiful moment in episode 4 where he comes back and owns up to the fact that he's part of the reason Dunk's in this mess, because he had to say something to save his own ass. But then he talks about his dreams, his dragon dreams, which are the reason he's a drunkard, because he's trying to drown them out. And he's talking about like the great he dreamed of the great dragon that had fallen over Duncan, but the dragon was dead and Dunk was alive, and obviously that dragon represents Baelor. But that moment where he is just kind of owning up to his failures and I'm doomed to some kind of hell. I know, probably one without line, which is very much a Tyrion kind of line. But I don't want to just, you said the final episode, so I want to just go back to that moment that Darren really is the character who gets Dunk to reconsider taking Egg on, because of, he rightly says to that moment in the beginning, like, I think I'm done with princes. I think I've done enough damage. I think I need to get a fresh start away from all this. And it's Darren who basically says, if you don't take Egg with you, then he will grow up. We will ruin him as well, essentially. And that the fact that that is what inspires Dunk to, make his pitch to Makar, that Makar rejects. But then it's really the moment that his heart, he recognizes that he can do some good in the world with this kid who ultimately will be king. And I think that, Darren has kind of Darren's a very tragic figure, ultimately, but I thought that I didn't expect that from the character when we first encountered him, and he wound up being a very kind of emotionally pivotal, role.
I really like that, like what both the actors who both played Darren and Villar I brought to their characters, because especially like Villar, we don't get much of him.
Yeah.
And even his scene in the final episode is not very long. It's actually quite brief, but I just thought that the actor's name is Oscar Morgan. I just thought he did a really great job at portraying a son's grief for his father. And I just, because for the most part throughout the show, he's sort of more in the background of a lot of scenes. And so to come in and nail that moment, I thought was really, really powerful. So hats off to both of them, because I thought they did a great job.
Yep, I agree.
And also I want to talk about just, you brought it up, Makar's offer to Dunk to go to Summerhall
Mm-hmm.
and take Ed to Squire and to finish his own training. Here's the thing, like, that is a really damn good offer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Summerhall. It's not like they'd be at King's Landing where with all the really dirty politics and stuff. Um, Part of me is like, you should have taken that off. I actually think it might have worked out okay, but things happen the way they happen. And I understand why Dunk is like, no, he needs to be away from all that stuff. But I'm like, but like, it's funny because at the beginning of the season, that is exactly what Dunk would have killed for. I mean, that's exactly what he would have wanted. And it's through that sort of realization of exactly why Sir Arlen lived his life the way he did, and his understanding of, the world is not exactly what I thought it was, and if I'm going to actually try to impart something onto this young boy, it needs to be in a way that is in keeping with the ideals that I hold. And like, so I get it, but at the same time, it's like, that's a hell of an offer to turn down.
I do think Dunk would have still been able to do some good with Egg there, but he has his reasons, as he said. Both Darren and Arian were raised at Summerall, and they didn't turn out very well. And and just, metatextually, we in the Game of Thrones, The Song of Ice and Fire fan, we hear the name Summerhall, and we know it's basically synonymous with tragedy for events that have yet to happen in the timeline. So ultimately, Summerhall will come back into the story later, but for now, I think it's probably for the best that Dunk and Egg are on the road instead.
Yeah, and there's just that beautiful moment between the two of them after Dunk turns down Makar's official, first offer, and uh, were you spying? No. Which, by the way, I love, and obviously because his hair is starting to grow out, that's why he's got the hat on. But I loved his little beret hat. uh, Especially because it kind of reminded me of a tip of the cap to some of the more outlandish attire in the illustrations in the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms book, which are so far from the Game of Thrones aesthetic that it's kind of jarring to me every time I read the book. But yeah, I thought that was kind of funny, and but yeah, that scene of I can't edge, and maybe you're not the knight I thought you were, and that of course comes before the scene that you talked about with Darren, but yeah, it's just Ed just really wants to latch on to this man that he admires, just very much like Dunk wanted to do with Sir Arlen. But and and then of course by the end of the episode he gets to after a great wonderful scene between Dunk and Raymond, where Raymond is gifted Sweetfoot,
Yeah.
which I thought was wonderful, and then there's a moment earlier in the episode where Raymond gives Dunk a hug that goes on for just a little bit too long, and Dunk's like, okay.
Yeah, it's again, it's a very relatable moment, but yeah, the bromance between those two is so strong, and I'm just like, Raymond's got to come back at some point in the later seasons. He just has to. Maybe after he and Rowan have like 6 kids.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I just, yeah, I thought it was great. And I will say, watching the season again today, I was getting misty eyed earlier in the season when Dunk had to sell Sweetfoot.
Yeah.
And so this moment at the end is really wonderful, where, and he gets to say goodbye to Sweetfoot on his own terms of actually giving him to someone who he knows will, take care of them. And yeah, I thought it was a really beautiful moment. And so, yeah, we got to see those characters again at some point. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
And then things wrap up with Ed coming, saying that he has his father's permission to come squire, which, of course, this is not the way things go in the book, at least not that we know of. It certainly seems from all indications like Makar actually lets him go in the book, but no, little scamp running away from home again. But I kind of love it. I know other people are more mixed on it because, oh God, how dare we change things? But again, as I said earlier, I'm on board with it, and they'll deal with the ramifications next year or the year after. But for now, I'm just it gave great comic relief at the very end of the episode, and I thought it was great. I loved it.
Yeah. No, I did too. I do think that it probably opens up a complicated can of worms about the fact that, in a certain terms, Dunk has basically absconded with a member of the royal family, and he would be well within his rights to hunt him down, even though Egg, ultimately, is the one who chose to go with him. But as I said, I do think that the show will address it at some point, whether it's in the next 2 seasons or beyond there. But as like kind of a comedic button to this season, it's pretty freaking great.
Especially like, and we get the wonderful, beautiful sort of emotional climax of, Dan Romer's, store, sort of rising up as they ride off, and then Sir Arlen parts ways, and again, really sort of playing into, this is a coming of age story for, for Duncan. And so you could very easily just end the season there, and like it would be a phenomenal ending on its own, but then just to like, add the comedic, like I always say, like it always works for me when like you like tug at my heartstrings and then come in with a joke like right at the end, because it just makes your heart's already full, and then you get a chuckle on the way out of the theater, or in this case, the television. And so yeah, just to be feeling all the things that we were feeling, and then then capped off with, where the fuck is it? Just thought it was great.
Makar, you are gonna have quite a time managing everything because now he eventually becomes king, and just know that like that's gonna be yet another thing that he's gonna have to like be just perpetually indignant over, in addition to his kids running off. And
Yeah. So so yeah, is there anything else you want to say about the season before we wrap this up?
Only 2 things. One, you mentioned Dan Romer, the composer, who, this is the first Game of Thrones series that's not, being scored by Ramin Djawadi, and obviously Ramin Djawadi is a fucking legend, and has created some of the best music for any cinematic property ever. And we still get the main Game of Thrones theme, in the key moment. But I thought Dan Romer did an exceptional job overall. I especially love the music that ends the first episode, which is called "The Luck Is Ours Alone," and then the music that ends the final moment, which is called "I Suppose We Could Go Anywhere." And I had known Dan Romer primarily from he did actually one of my favorite film scores ever, "Beasts of the Southern Wild," all the way back in 2012. It's extraordinary work, but then he had kind of fallen off my radar, and when he came back for this show, I was like, all right, he's still got it.
I what I really liked about it was, and I want to be careful about the way I say this, because I absolutely adore Ramin Djawadi's music, but he also comes from the Hans Zimmer style of scoring, which is not a bad thing. Hans Zimmer is one of my favorite composers ever, but there's a certain style that, composers that sort of come from that side of the film music world that have, and I actually think Ramin Djawadi kind of moved a bit beyond that as the years went on. But what I liked about this score was it felt a bit more classical in its orchestrations, not necessarily in the style of the music itself, like I said, because it like it had a very Western vibe in a lot of places, which, so it's not classical in the sense of like a John Williams score is classical, but just the way the choices of instruments and the way they were used felt very traditional to me, which I kind of liked, because that was what I thought we were going to get something like that for the original Game of Thrones show before, because they originally had a different composer before they brought Ramin and but that ended up working brilliantly for that show. But I liked getting a slightly different flavor of music for this show, and I especially loved the way that he took Ramin's Game of Thrones theme but made it his own, and especially as the credits roll, there's a nice like it's that Game of Thrones theme, but it's also the theme that Dan Rimmer wrote for Dunk, and it's intertwining those things, and I just thought it was uh, really beautiful. Which is not to say like I heard people say that's what they should have done for House of the Dragon. I'm like, screw off. I love the use of you know why? Because that's Ramin's score, and like, and even though maybe it wasn't his decision to stick with the original theme for that show, I still think it works like gangbusters. So yeah, even though I liked them going in a different direction here, does not mean that I have any issue whatsoever with the direction they took for House of the Dragon. So, so yeah. So you look forward to seeing, sort of what he does in the next couple seasons because I'm sure themes will return, but as there's different settings, I wonder if he'll sort of adjust the style of the music to fit certain situations and how that'll change. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what we get with the music moving forward.
Well, and since you mentioned season two, I just want to, my last thought before we wrap up is, we were originally supposed to do this stream last week. We had to push it for various reasons, but we ended up getting a little bit of news in the past week. We got our first castings for season two, with 3 announced roles, with Lucy Boynton, who I know from the movies like Sing Street and Bohemian Rhapsody, as Lady Rohan Weber, a character I'm very excited for. Peter Mullen, the great Peter Mullen, as Sir Eustace Osgrey, from Top of the Lake and Rings of Power. And Babu Sise from Alien Earth as Sir Bennis of the Brown Shield. And when I saw that, I'm just like, the Game of Thrones casting winning streak fucking continues. Bravo to all 3.
Yeah. Peter Mullen, I'm in particular excited for because aside from the roles you mentioned, also like for me, the first time I ever saw him was in Braveheart,
Yeah.
which it's actually a more minor role in Braveheart, but he always stuck out in my mind. Like him and the other guy are kind of like the chorus.
Yeah.
And then sort of commenting on the goings on with the various battles. And then he was also in Children of Men, and like
Yeah.
he's just one of those actors who has popped up in so many things, and you're always like, guy. And then of course playing Durin the Third in Rings of Power, just absolutely incredible. So it's when I saw his name, I was especially like, yes. And then you mentioned Babu Sise. We just did our Alien Earth, stream, and he's just amazing. So I'm glad I won't have to wait for I don't know when we're getting season 2 of Alien Earth, but maybe we'll get a Night of the 17th of season 2 before that. I don't know. We'll see. Um, and then yeah, they can't wait for Rohan Weber. You know, and and for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, looking forward to season 2, and then before we get that, we're going to be getting season 3 of House of the Dragon, and we got our first
Oh,
trailer, and it looks amazing.
yes, it
Um,
does.
yeah, lots of drama, big, huge action scenes that lots of people were complaining they didn't get last season. But uh, good things come to those who wait, and we're finally getting that stuff, and yeah, I just can't wait because I love my new Game of Thrones show that like takes a different direction with things, but I'm also looking forward to the heavy political intrigue and mayhem of House of the Dragon. um, it's been too long without that show, and I'm glad that seems like we're gonna get into this pattern of a Game of Thrones show a year. Um, unless certain real world things shake that up. We're not going to get into that.
No.
There's no time. But yeah, I can't wait. Any quick thoughts from you about that season 3 trailer?
No, I'm so hyped for House of the Dragon season 3. You and I both loved season 2. I know it was some people had more complicated feelings on it. Surprise, surprise, we liked a Game of Thrones season, and some people
We fucking
fucking
loved
loved it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, but
I told you when it was on, it was like one of my, and I think we both were kind of in agreement about this, was that it was, our one of our favorite seasons of anything Game of Thrones, like
oh
ever.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean I got the frustrations that some people had with the fact that HBO abruptly shortened the episode order, so what was supposed to be the big climactic battle in season 2 got moved to the beginning of season 3. But as you said, good things come to those who wait, and from what I see in the trailers, it's going to be well worth it. And yes, I love the fact that it doesn't need to be either or when it comes to flavors of Game of Thrones, with the smaller, more quiet, intimate drama of a Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and the big action spectacle and complicated familial politics of House of the Dragon in the original show. It can be both and, because we love it all.
Oh, we talked about the Game of Thrones buffet.
Oh yes, much like the Star Wars buffet, it's ever expanding, and we're eating good.
Yeah. Okay, so just real quick before we sign off, next week we're going to be doing Oscar talk. And we're going to be doing a pre-show for that Oscar ceremony on Sunday night, where we'll be talking about all of our favorite movies from 2025. I haven't completely decided on the format that's going to take. You and I actually are probably going to talk about that right after we sign off. I think I might have whittled mine down to a top 10 list with honorable mentions, but I don't know. I might change my mind on that. This could be devoid of any format whatsoever, and it could just be us talking about our favorite movies of last year without any rhyme or reason. So, either way, it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm actually doing double duty on talking about the Oscars this coming week, because on this coming Thursday, I'll be over on Costume Coast channel again, talking with Heidi and some other people about the Oscars this year. So maybe I'll get some of my anger and resentment out of the way before we actually do our stream. We'll see.
That would be good, because yeah, I know you had some thoughts about the Oscars this year. I'm generally more positive on the movies that are nominated, although I share your frustrations with some of the movies that are not. But we are, next week's stream ideally is going to be, even though we're billing it as an Oscar pre-show, essentially, what it's really going to be is a celebration of the movies that we loved most in 2025.
Yeah, it is technically an Oscar pre-show because it will be taking place before the Oscars. But yeah, in every other way, it's going to be basically our top 10, top 15, whatever show, movies of the year, with little attention paid to all that other stuff. Although I'm sure you'll if we wrap up before the actual ceremony, that won't be a factor. But if we extend on, you might be making some announcements throughout
Yeah.
about who's winning those early awards.
I think we're probably actually going to run into the beginning of the ceremony, because we do this at 6 p.m. Eastern, and I think the Oscars will start at least no later than 8. If maybe it's at 7, who knows? But yeah, so we'll probably run into the beginning of the Oscar ceremony, but that's okay. We can multi-screen.
Okay, so yeah, tune in for that next week, and then we got exciting stuff laying after that. We're going to be getting into the rest of the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And what else do we have on the horizon? We're gonna start
Nope, Later.
talking. we're talking about Outlander season 1, which we'll actually have a guest on for those episodes. Heidi is from Costume Co. is going to join us to talk about the show, and then eventually we're also getting to stream about the film Excalibur, which I wanted to do more as an anniversary stream, but things got kind of pushed down the line for various reasons, and so we're just besides, we left the anniversary stuff to last year anyway. We don't need to follow that. So I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, down the line we'll have more Star Wars stuff because Maul Shadow Lord is going to start up, and looking forward to that. So yeah, join us next week for our Oscars pre-show. And yeah, anything to say before we sign off, Jared?
Just looking forward to more times with Dunk and Egg going forward. Looking forward to spending more time in Westeros, not only with these characters, but also with you, Gwen. Because now that we've broken the seal on talking about Game of Thrones in this channel, I want to keep doing it because this is one of the touchstones for us, and eventually we will get back to talking about the thing that brought us together in our friendship in the first place.
Oh yeah, we will go through that original show, and then we'll working all the way up to our controversial feelings about season 8, which I don't know. I kind of feel are probably not that controversial in the real world, but
No.
on social media it's a little bit more so. But yeah, hope you guys had a great time watching, and like I said, hope to see you next week. And yeah, until then, I don't know what's a good thing to sign off with this week. I don't know. You're always better at that than I am, Jared.
I don't know. Maybe we just say I was going to say the luck is ours alone, but that feels a little bit more exclusionary. So I would just say that in the name of the warrior, we charge you to be brave. In the name of the father, we charge you to be just. In the name of the mother, we charge you to defend the innocent. Arise, Knights of the Seven Kingdoms. We will be back.
And then we'll cap it off with, "Where the fuck is he?"
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.